Tonight's debate is against Vaush versus P.F. Jung on topic of Jordan Peterson. No idea exactly where it's going to go, but P.F. seems to have been chomping on the bit to want to get into this, so I'm looking forward to it. P.F. Jung, how you doing? It's nice to see you back tonight. Why don't you give yourself a shout out to everybody where they can find you?
Thank you, Andrew. My name is Paul. I have a YouTube channel called P.F. Jung, and I talk about things I think are interesting and important, like whether or not Jordan Peterson is a force for good. So thank you for having me, as always.
All right. You're very welcome. And then, of course, Vaush from Vaush. Go ahead and shout your channel out. Tell everybody where they can find you.
Yeah, I'm Vaush from Vaush. You can find me at Vaush, or sometimes Vaush V, or even Vaush Video if you're looking on Twitch. But usually Vaush will suffice. Google will take care of the rest.
All right, gotcha. Like I said, there's been some hiccups with YouTube tonight. I don't know what the deal is exactly.
The whole internet's on fire right now. Twitter fell apart.
Twitter's down too.
Yeah, I don't know what the hell happened. Of course, it was on Jordan Peterson debate night, right? Of course.
No,
but in any case,
his YouTube contacts to disrupt the servers in preparation for this. That's fair.
That's right. It was all an inside job. Anyhow, the debater is going to have 7-minute opening statements. Remember that you can become a Crucible member, and you can give the gift of a membership, even though it's past Christmas. Who cares? Do it anyway. Reach into your dirty hearts and give the gift of a membership today. And with that, P.F. Jung, go ahead with your opening statement. You have 7 minutes on the clock.
Cool. I don't think I will need all of it. So my position is pretty straightforward. I think that Jordan Peterson is a significant net positive for society for at least two main reasons. There's more, but these are the two that I would like to discuss today if possible. Number one, he provides simple, practical, and effective psychological advice, and he does it in a way that is well received by tens of millions of people all over the world, actually. In particular, his advice lands with young men, who I believe Vaush and I would agree are the most dangerous group of people in society when they become resentful, disenfranchised, and socially isolated. Most of the violence, obviously, on the far right is perpetuated by young men, and most of the people who hijacked the Black Lives Matter protests and turned them violent, for example, were also disenfranchised young men. And so if Peterson, who's a clinical psychologist, is providing clinically effective psychological advice on a mass scale to the people who need it most, then that alone, I think, puts him pretty squarely on the net positive side of the equation. I am genuinely curious to hear if there's any advice that Peterson gives to anyone that Vaush disapproves of. The second main reason I think Jordan Peterson is a net positive has to do with his ideas about religion and morality. This is something that hardcore atheists take great issue with Jordan Peterson. This is something that hardcore atheists take great, yes, repeated it twice. Great start. They think he enables fundamentalism by using religious language and being vague about it, and being vague about whether or not he believes in God. And my claim is that Jordan Peterson is actually doing more than anyone to undermine and neutralize religious dogmatism, which is a potential exaggeration, maybe not more than anyone. So I'd like to discuss that. And so those are the two main points, and we can talk about whatever Vaush wants to bring up. To be clear, the reason that I say Jordan Peterson is a net positive for society is because he does a lot of things that I think are bad, and I will be as quick to condemn as Vaush. For example, I completely disagree with him when it comes to his hesitance around allowing transgender adults to seek medical transition. He did not say that it should be illegal, but he also said he wasn't sure if it should be legal, which I think is ridiculous. Any adult should be able to undergo whatever medical procedures he or she is willing to pursue, provided they have informed consent. I also think you can make the case that Jordan Peterson is literally the worst Twitter user ever if you factor in wasted potential and just unnecessary boomer old man rage. But overall, I don't think that comes close to outweighing the good he has done on net. He's certainly not a gateway to the alt-right. He's not a religious fundamentalist. And he's not even in remotely the same conceptual universe as Andrew Tate, which I have heard some people make allusions to. Despite the fact that Peterson, like everyone, including myself and Vaush, and especially Andrew, has said dumb things, I think he is genuinely trying to do as much good as he possibly can, and anyone who approaches him with even a relatively open mind will come to the same conclusion. And lastly, I just want to show my cards a little bit. I am coming into this debate very biased because I have gotten a lot of mental health help personally myself from watching Peterson's lectures. He is in part what drove me to go to therapy a couple years ago, which is a good decision. And there is, in my opinion, there's a part of me that that gets resentful about having to defend that as a straight white male, I needed mental health help, and I got it from a YouTube video lecture, and then went to therapy. And while I think there is a justifiable indignance I feel when people say, for example, that Jordan Peterson is a Nazi or a terrible person, the fact that I'm biased towards him does not absolve me of the responsibility to be open to legitimate critiques. And if anyone can levy a legitimate critique against Jordan Peterson, I bet it's Vaush. So thank you to both you guys, and I look forward to this.
All right, thank you for that opening statement. Vaush, go ahead. The clock has restarted. You have 7 minutes on the clock. You can use all of it, as little bit as you want, whatever you want to do.
Yeah, so I'm glad that you fronted and preemptively addressed the "he's a bad Twitter user" argument. That was my golden bullet there. Aside from that one, though, there were a couple of things. So we're talking net positives here, and the problem ultimately with discussing the potential value of his psych advice is that he is primarily known for and popularized by conservative political arguments more so than self-help. He's known as a self-help guy, but he became famous because of his fallacious opposition to Bill C-16 in Canada. He's now a part of the Daily Wired network, what he's known for, what he talks about, it is at this point primarily conservative propaganda, which, obviously I disagree with. When it comes to the self-help stuff, I have read some of 12 Rules for Life, not just the snippets online, but a little bit of it, because I was curious to see what it contained. And I think that for the most part, a lot of his psychological prescriptions are fairly inoffensive. I don't think they're revolutionary or groundbreaking. I'm glad that some of the messaging in there is somewhat popular with people who are interested in hearing it. I guess the issue here is this is kind of like the the goat problem, right? Like you build 1,000 bridges and you one goat, and I feel like we're talking about a disproportionate sliver of what the man does and is responsible for. If I were to evaluate him purely on his psychological credentials, what value there is to that, I would say that whatever good there is to the positive psychiatric advice, I think, is offset by the fact that he will invariably, by proxy, wisen these young men up to conservative politics, which I think are harmful not only to the world, but also to their mental health. It seems like it kind of self-compensates in that respect. I also take great issue with his emphasis on individualism as a way of distracting from systemic issues. He's famously said you shouldn't critique the world unless your own house is in order, and I am okay with messaging on the subjects of independence, self-reliance, discipline. That's fine. I think those are good, wonderful things. But the message, like, you shouldn't attempt to engage in systemic critique unless your house is in order. Well, everyone's house isn't in order. Nobody could meet that standard. It seems like a way of dissuading people from engaging in the kind of systemic change that could actually address a lot of the issues people need people like Peterson for, kind of like they make jokes about how Peterson is a surrogate dad for a lot of people who didn't have a good relationship with their father. A lot of people say that insultingly, but I don't think there's anything morally wrong or shameful about having grown up without a good father figure, right? But ultimately, I hope we could agree that the ideal would be a world in which there isn't a bunch of people who feel that way, addressing the underlying systemic cause there seems like a more worthwhile goal. And if he's impeding that process, then I don't know. And finally, I'll just say on religion and morality, I don't really take issue with his use of religious terminology when it comes to his moral denunciations. I think that we tend to see stuff like that in flowery poetry anyway. So, it seems like it's kind of unavoidable, especially with somebody as verbose and eccentric as him. And I mean that sincerely. But his system of morality is his actual system of deciding what is or isn't moral seems really incoherent in a way that normally leans towards the validation of conservative ideals, and that's because the whole point of like religious justification of moral systems is that now you can assign a kind of supernatural or metaphysical importance to your beliefs. And if you're doing that in a really bad direction, I think you're potentially doing a lot of damage. I would rather have to deal with bad secular arguments against, say, the existence of, I don't know, gay people than religious ones, because you run up against a logical wall with the religious ones. Eventually, you can't convince people past a point because it's metaphysically justified. Anyway, those are my points, and I need no more time.
All right, appreciate that very much. Before I open the floor up, just let me remind the audience on wherever you're watching that we will be taking call-ins tonight, and also send in a super chat if you have a question for the debaters. As the debate is going, we will be getting to all those and getting all those fielded. Last thing I did want to quickly address before I open the floor up was Vaush brought up the goat analogy, which is essentially to say, and I just want to make sure I got this right, Vaush, that you can spend your entire life being a great builder, for instance, and build the greatest of all cathedrals. But if you one goat, you're not known as the cathedral builder, but as the goat. Is that correct?
Yes, or as the
Okay.
self-help advice guy.
Right. I have my own version of saying that one, but I think it's a funny one, I must admit. Anyway, gentlemen, the floor is open. Go ahead.
Sure. Well, I think lobster would be more appropriate for Jordan Peterson than goat. But I guess, okay, it sounded like you don't. So just to be clear, you don't have any issue with any moral prescription that Jordan Peterson offers from a self-help or psychological perspective. Is that correct?
Well, I don't have them all listed in front of me. I'm sure if you were to, I could find some
Anyone.
specific ones I disagree with. I doubt I would agree with everything he says there, but the offensive stuff from him, the stuff that I really take issue with, is the broader political stuff. He has said some
Sure.
stuff on the self-help train that I do explicitly disagree with, like the aforementioned make sure your house is in order before critiquing the world kind of thing. But generally, when I critique him, it's not for the self-help stuff.
Yeah, well, the point about, I think his order, his rule is, what is it? Get your house in perfect order before you criticize the world, which I think is the worst rule he's written, because no one's house can ever be in perfect order. So the implication is that you can't criticize the world. If I ever had the opportunity to ask him one question, I would say, why did you purposely put the word perfect? I think you should set your house in order. I think you should generally get your own life together before you go about starting to criticize and offer solutions for massive problems when you can't even solve the problems that are right in front of you in your own life. So I think that's the underlying message. I guess what is you said his self-help leads to conservative values, which, okay, depending on how you define conservative, maybe. And I know that you are not a conservative. I don't think anyone would be surprised at that, but conservative does not mean bad. I think you'd have to explain what behavior his advice leads to and why that behavior is bad.
Well, I think a lot of it is just pure adjacency. Even if all of his self-help advice was perfect, I mean, like if I disagreed with none of it, which isn't really possible for anyone, but let's say he
Sure.
met that standard. If he was also a conservative commentator, then simply by being popular as a self-help guy, he would then legitimize the conservative politics through adjacency, especially because self-help is such an intimate and personal topic. It's not just like he's really good at car repair, but is also a conservative. You know, it's you can't really separate self-help from one's political views, because fundamentally in both cases you're talking about like prescriptive values, not some bland descriptive technical thing. So even if all of his self-help positions were perfect, I still think that he would be pulling people over to conservatism just by being one.
Okay, and like I said, conservative and liberal both have their benefits and flaws. So, or conservative and progressive, or however you want it, left and right, to be as broad as possible. I don't see that inherently as a problem. And maybe more interestingly, because you brought up I brought up religion and you responded to that. Jordan Peterson, for example, the reason I said that Jordan Peterson is doing more to undermine religious dogmatism than anyone, and I would say religious dogmatism is central to religious or to political conservatism. He's an evolutionary biologist who makes the case for the evolutionary, evolving of religion as adaptive features of evolution. Religions are belief systems that have wisdom in them, and he's taking an evolutionary perspective on that. And a religious fundamentalist, unless you define religious fundamentalist in a very strange way, would necessarily take odds with that. So I don't see how his entire body of work being at odds with religious fundamentalism leads to anything approaching conservative values or dogmatism.
Well, it seems like you agree with the idea that people would be moved to conservatism through his self-help stuff just because he is a conservative, because there is that adjacency. But when it comes to religious fundamentalism specifically, the fundamentalist elements of his ideology are present, the ones that I take most issue with. I wouldn't really care if he was a flat earther or a creationist or whatever. He assigns religious inherent moral weight to his denunciations. The political ones, which are, of course, conservative and therefore highly disagreeable. See, it's impossible to talk about his effect on the world without really evaluating the kind of stuff he has to say politically. And a lot of it is really, really bad. If it wasn't so bad, I wouldn't have so much of an issue with the self-help advice.
Like what? Like, give an example.
Well, I mean,
Well, what is an example of him invoking religious metaphysics to justify a political position?
Well, all of his moral denunciations are inherently metaphysically religious. When he says something is evil, or which he says all the time, he's not saying evil in the sense of like, I disagree with this. He's invoking God there. He believes that morality comes from religion, and for that reason, when he's denouncing something, it must necessarily come from some kind of like innate worldview. I mean, he does the whole chaos versus order thing, but what he's doing there fundamentally is like analogizing the light of God versus like the pernicious influence of the devil. It's all just different ways of framing the same binary moral system that we've seen religious types invoke as a way of justifying their politics.
Okay, you said earlier you don't have an issue with him using religious language. It's just kind of like poetic or whatnot. And you just described him using religious language and said you had an issue with it.
Not fundamentally,
so
but my issue there isn't the language that he uses. It's the metaphysical weight of what he's denouncing. When he says evil, like evil is not a religious term. Plenty of people use the term evil. But when he's talking about evil, good, bad, morality in general, he's doing so from a perspective of like religiously informed moral dogmatism, which obviously it kind of sets the work that he's doing, both in self-help and in politics, in a very particular light.
Okay. You assert that, but I don't think it's true, because one of the main pieces of criticism of him is that he's squirrely about whether or not he's actually religious, right? When someone says, do you believe in God? He doesn't say yes. He says, I act as if God exists. He says fundamentalists are naive. He says that people who take the Bible literally are swallowing a bunch of lies. So to me,
squirrely about a lot of stuff, though.
Well, aren't we all, Vaush?
Well, he's like famously squirrely about a lot of stuff. He gives non-answers all the time when he's asked direct questions.
If he was that squirrely, he wouldn't have millions of people listening to his lectures for 3 hours at a time.
I don't think that's true. Also, I've listened to his lectures, and they're also quite squirrely. When he's asked when he's asked direct questions, he worms around them all the time. He was famous for this. Like, you give an interview on asked, "What specifically do you believe?" And he talks around it often, I think, in babble speak, but sometimes he just clearly doesn't want to directly answer it. At any case, though, my issue here is not whether or not he specifically believes in some fundamentalist version of God. Do you believe when he says something is evil, good, or bad, do you think he's appealing to some kind of like fundamental natural moral force, something supernatural, divine, something otherworldly? Or do you think he's doing this kind of utilitarian subjectivism where he's only saying it's evil from his perspective?
I'm not sure I fully understand the implications of the difference that you set up there if I agreed either way. I mean, people, like you said, people use the term evil. You said evil's not a religious term. And I think actually evil is a very religious term. All of the non-religious people, like the determinists, would say that someone who's engaging in evil it's just a defect of the brain or something. Psychopathy is not evil if you understand it as psychopathy. So again, you say he's using religious language and he's invoking the metaphysical weight behind it. But again, when he need to provide an example of something he said invoking specifically the metaphysical.
Well, he talks about the metaphysical all the time when he talks about order, chaos, and the dragon and stuff. He's using these concepts to kind of refer to the broad moral value of certain types of worlds. I mean, literally, like good and evil, the framing between these things. When he talks about that, what do you think he's saying? Like when he says something is evil, what do you think he means?
I don't know. What's an example of something he said is evil?
I mean, I could go to his Twitter account. He uses the word pretty often, right?
I know. Well, I believe he's also I won't say it, but he's quoted. He said some very stupid shit on Twitter. Like
Sure, well, let's say
give an example.
transgender children, children taking hormone blockers. So he says that's evil. What does he mean when he says that?
I think what he means about when he's talking about trans children, he's specifically referring to gender reassignment surgery and double mastectomies being performed on like 13-year-olds by physicians who have a financial incentive. And when he says that's evil, I think that's, to me, that's self-evident why that's evil.
Well,
Just
we're loading
it's self-evident why someone abusing a child for profit is evil.
Well, we're loading a lot here. So a surgeon is a job. So if they're doing the job, they're doing it with a profit motive. But he has not specifically said, like you said himself, he is denouncing the right for adults to pursue gender-affirming surgery,
No,
which means
he said he wasn't sure whether or not it should be illegal.
Okay, well, even you took time to call out that behavior of his, so we agree then that he
and
has
specify what he said.
a bugbear with what he with the issue of access to trans. But let's say specifically like a 16-year-old
13-year-olds getting their breasts cut off.
Okay, so let's say like a 16-year-old trans chick is getting hormone blockers, which is the thing that can happen. You can do that. It's possible. In such a case, when he says this is evil, and he has said stuff like that is evil, not just 13-year-old double mastectomy, whatever, but he's applied the term there as well.
I don't think that's true. Not about 16-year-olds, because he's a fan of Ken Zucker's work, and Ken Zucker does prescribe puberty blockers for 16-year-olds. So what he says is evil is 13-year-olds getting their breasts removed. So no, I don't agree. It's the 16-year-olds on puberty blockers.
Didn't he go after Elliot Page, who was in his 20s, saying that it was maybe morally wrong for a public figure to be trans because it could like corrupt the values of people broadly?
No, he said he would have left Elliot Page alone had she not like made it a big deal and flaunted it. And his argument
He's
was,
a celebrity. Why would he
how
not?
many
He made
how
one
many
tweet about
people
it.
how many people did Elliot Page convince to pursue gender surgery than they otherwise might not have because of her? Which, you know, it's like, again, I think that was a rage tweet, but let's stick with the argument of 13-year-olds. We know for a fact, it's not disputed. I could pull up the studies right now from the Journal of the American Medical Association that 13-year-olds are having their breasts cut off, double mastectomies, and then followed up with 6 months to 2 years later, and it's considered a success. So Jordan Peterson says that's evil. To me, that's self-evident.
I don't think I've actually ever heard a story of a 13-year-old getting a double mastectomy. I'm sure you could find some cases, but we would be talking maybe like single digits for that age. That's really far down. Why
Well,
at that
hold on.
age? Why would you
just
even get a
because-
double mastectomy when you're still going to experience breast growth? That's kind of weird.
There's a number of weird things going on. But hold on, to say it's a small, first off, it may be a small number, but to say it's a small number doesn't eliminate the moral weight or severity of it.
Then why are we talking about like such an incredibly small minority of like why can't we just say like so?
Well, that's the response that conservatives say when why are we talking about police shooting unarmed black men when only about 20 unarmed black men are killed per year?
Because we're talking about a broader systemic issue.
Exactly. That's why we're talking about the 13-year-old double mastectomy.
Okay, but what we're really trying to talk about is what Jordan Peterson means when he says evil. So you say it's self-evidently evil that happens. What do you mean when you say evil?
I mean the same thing when I say someone abusing a child is evil. I don't feel like I need to explain myself in that regard.
I'm asking you to explain yourself. What do you mean by evil? What does that term mean to you?
Yes, we can see that, Andrew. I don't know. When I say the Nazis gassing Jews in the Holocaust was evil, are you being serious right now in that you want me to explain that as if it's not obvious?
I want you to tell me what you mean when you say evil. What does the word evil mean? What system are you referring to when you say something is evil? What's the...
It's very, very bad. It should be avoided at all costs.
Okay, but
that's what I mean by evil.
Right, but why? Like what? So you say something is evil, so it's bad. Okay, but like why? By what system?
By what system?
Like, how do you know if something is evil?
How do I know that when Hitler rounded up the Jews and put them in gas chambers that was evil? I don't know. I get a funny feeling, I guess, when I hear that, and I think this sounds pretty evil to me. Do you understand this is kind of a weird question?
No, it's actually essential. Without grounding where your morality comes from, it's almost impossible to talk about it.
Okay. Well, we can have the conversation about moral realism, moral anti-realism, and maybe come back to this.
But this is kind of critical, right? When it comes to
do you
Jordan
believe
Peterson,
in evil? What do you mean when you do you agree that, for example, let's just take an obvious example we both agree on, I would assume.
Mhm.
You do believe that what the Nazis did was evil, correct?
Of course.
Okay. And what is your standard for
Well,
defining evil?
I'm a moral anti-realist, so I arbitrarily chose a set of axioms that I want to maximize, which I do through a normative ethical framework that I call utilitarianism, and not just I, a bunch of people do. And then through utilitarianism, I try to determine whether or not I think something is good or bad based on the effects that it has. And evil is basically just a strong word for bad in this case. I don't think that evil has a distinct meaning. I just think it means bad.
That's how I use
very.
it. Sure. That's how I'm using it. Very, very bad.
Right, but so are you a moral anti-realist as well?
I mean, I don't know. Certainly Peterson's been accused of being a moral anyone who
that's definitely not true. Jordan Peterson has
that's absolutely true. He's accused of being postmodern by all the religious people.
Does that mean he is? It's not like religious types are that philosophically educated.
Well, I think some of them. I agree that some of them aren't, but I think some of them are pretty well educated.
Look,
I'm kind of confused. This is the conversation we're having. You say your problem with Jordan Peterson, he invokes metaphysical religious presuppositions or something like that, which I say he doesn't do, and you haven't given an example of how that's the case. He uses evil in, as far as I know, the way that you're using it, very, very bad. And and what I don't understand is
why is it very, very bad?
I don't. Why?
Because his assessment for whether or not something is good or bad has nothing to do with mine.
Do you understand that you're like, when we come into a conversation, we have to have some level of agreement on the underlying rules that we're operating by, the presuppositions. And for example, the Nazis are bad, and we'll use that as the example. Like, I feel like I don't need to explain myself. I'll use it in the same way. Very, very bad. Whatever you said, utilitarian. I believe in maximizing good. What's Jordan Peterson's meme motto? Minimize unnecessary suffering. Jordan Peterson's a strict utilitarian in that regard. Then,
if he's a strict utilitarian, then it seems kind of odd that the stuff he says is good or bad all the time has very little to do with what's actually harmful. I mean, you want to denounce his Twitter behavior broadly, and I mean, he does come across as kind of a crank sometimes on it. But like the most prominent times that he's gotten in trouble on Twitter recently, where he randomly called a fat woman like ugly and said that authoritarian beauty standards wouldn't convince him otherwise.
Yes, I believe he said not beautiful, which was a mistake, and I literally made a video saying, actually, I think she's,
and he continued with it with the videos he made. And then he made a video with his daughter.
He's imperfect.
And there was the Elliot Page thing where he seems to adopt the position that it's morally wrong for a celebrity to be trans because other people might be trans because of it.
No, he's saying it's wrong to celebrate it, flaunt it, propagate it out to 13-year-old children who.
Don't overload it. Don't overload it. Elliot Page just took a picture. So Elliot Page is trans and just like took a selfie.
Sure.
Okay, so.
And his opinion, and I don't think he should have tweeted that about Elliot Page, but I'm explaining his thought process for going back to what's evil or not. His point is appears to be a social epidemic of a lot of children in particular converting or undergoing gender therapy when it's not correct for them. The Tavistock Clinic, which is the biggest gender assignment clinic in the UK, was shut down. It's being sued by 1,000 families. Scandinavia, I have to double check on Scandinavia banning puberty blockers, but they've certainly recommended a wait and see approach, which is the opposite of the affirmative care model. There's over the next year
they're wrong. Yes.
Yeah, well, we'll see. Over the next year or two, there's going to be numerous stories, and I've talked to people already who've been in this position of people who thought they were transgender, underwent medical transition, and then regretted it. And it's because, well, the regret rate is 1%. That's what the studies say. If that was the case, you wouldn't have 1,000 families suing the Tavistock Clinic.
Yeah, you can.
So there's the point, and to be fair, I'm asserting this and you're asserting the opposite. We'd have to actually look at the studies.
We can look at the
can't.
studies directly. Something like 98% of people don't regret their gender-related surgery and hormone treatments, which is a level of acceptance several times higher than that of hip surgery.
That's
the overwhelming majority of people who detransition as well, detransition due to running out of money or lack of social support. I think it's something like 70% in total. So we have like 98% are satisfied with their medical so and so, and then of the 2% remaining, a majority of those only detransitioned because of a lack of the resources or social care they needed to keep at it, leaving a very small minority of people lower than that of the regret rates of almost anything else. There's a reason why medical standards trend towards the affirmative care model. It's because it's the one with the most supportive data. The UK closed down those clinics, and the lawsuits are happening not because of medical research, but because of politics. That happened after a prolonged multi-year campaign of conservatives lying about the effectiveness of gender therapy and gender treatments. And what follows, you said Scandinavian, it's one of the Scandinavian countries, I don't remember which one, they did move to more of a wait-and-see model for puberty blockers, and the reason for that was in part the citation of the UK clinic shutting down. So all this suggests to me that this is politics. Sweden it is. It's politics at play, not medicine. So It seems to me like we're at kind of like an ethical impasse.
Can I respond to that?
Well, I just want to say what
Sure.
Jordan Peterson is talking about. We were talking about the Nazis earlier, which I think is very apropos.
Hold on, before we move on, I want to address.
Hang on, Paul.
I just want to finish, and then I'll be done really quick.
Okay.
Jordan Peterson was saying that Elliot Page was a degenerate. The Nazi theory of degeneracy is one in which pervasive social harm and corruption, usually through liberal progressivism, is spread from person to person like a disease and has to be cut off at the root and burned out in order to eradicate entirely. That is what Jordan Peterson was saying, that Elliot was spreading degeneracy by promoting those elements of himself.
Okay. There's a couple things I want to say. First off, he never said degenerate. That never showed up in his vocabulary.
Never said it, no.
Okay, so that was wrong. And everything else you said regarding the studies, I'm aware that that's the perspective that people have. That's 100% wrong. Those studies are as valid as the Lisa Littman study that suggests rapid onset gender dysphoria is a social contagion. So you can assert everything you said about the regret rate is 1%, the social transition rate, or the reason that people cite when they detransition is because of social regret. That is all 100% wrong. And
can you prove that?
This is an open challenge to you or anyone watching. I am more than happy to pull up the study. We can't do it in this debate because we didn't prepare for this ahead of time. We'll pull up the studies on screen, go through every single section of the study, and I am utterly confident, I could be wrong, but I am utterly confident that not a single person can defend any of the studies that are suggesting that imply any of the statistics that you just put forward. So we have to have a separate discussion for that, because it's just a he said, unless we pull up the studies. And
we can bring them up right now. A lot of these studies have thousands or even tens of thousands of respondents, whereas the study that you referred to, the one that talks about rapid onset dysphoria or whatever else, that was just polling a bunch of transphobic moms.
Okay. Here's what I'll wrap this, because, and Andrew, let's have, whether it's you or whoever, let's have this discussion where we send the studies in advance and pull up ahead of time.
Then wait, just tell me why they're illegitimate then. If we don't want to go by it
for the same reasons, I went through the meta-analysis that I think Rose Rist put together some time ago, 50 Cornell studies. Every single one of them was as flawed as the Lisa Littman study.
Okay,
for the same reasons.
The Lisa Littman study was flawed because all they did was ask the parents who they found from transphobic online forums and developed a new social theory based on what they heard, complete hearsay from those people. Whereas the studies I'm referring to are meta-analyses of
individual studies that did the same thing.
Wait, no. We're talking about clinics reporting satisfaction rates from their clients. We're not
that
asking
are
the
flawed
mom.
studies.
Wait,
you gave
but-
an
wait,
example
wait,
why
but-
Lisa Littman's study is flawed because it
I
went
just
to,
explained it to you. So you can't ask the moms of a social group that you want to target, especially if you're recruiting them from bigoted online sites. But
sure.
what I'm
and
talking about,
equally, hold on, let me respond to that exact point. Equally, if you're conducting a study that says the surgery was successful, you cannot have a sample selection bias of only the pro-trans websites. And that's exactly what every single study.
They're not.
Yes.
Wait, these weren't pulled from pro-trans websites.
They were.
They were
I
from,
looked
no,
at
no,
them.
they weren't. They were from the patients at clinics. They were reports of satisfaction from the actual medical clinics where these people
those
went
that
to.
stayed in the clinic. Many of them left and were never reported on. Hold on.
Wait,
please,
please, wait, no. I can't let you get away with this, okay?
You can finish this point.
The fact that you're comparing, so the Lisa Littman study, its own thing, we're talking about the same standard of analysis and medical accreditation that we would use for any kind of surgery or medical care satisfaction process. You have a certain number of people at a clinic, and they all get a certain treatment, and they report their satisfaction afterwards, and then you add those numbers together and you get results. We use that system for every kind of medical treatment. And now somehow, for this specific issue, it's an illegitimate way of ascertaining the regret rates? Well, based on what evidence? What's the issue with it?
So, I said...
So hang on. We need to tie this in somehow to the topic at hand, which is Jordan Peterson, and that's not where we're at. We've kind of gotten off into the weeds.
We need to move on from this subject.
So I'm not moving into save anybody, not save anybody, but we have gone way off into the weeds here. So Vaush, did you have a way to tie that into Jordan Peterson, or was that like kind of a standalone point, or what did you have in mind with that?
Well, if we're talking about morality, what we're talking about ultimately is like my thesis here is that Jordan Peterson's interpersonal advice is massively outweighed by the harm of his political positions. And if he's spreading essentially Nazi doctrine when it comes to transgender people and their medical care, and that people are believing that doctrine because they trust him on the 12 rules of life or whatever, I think that's a pretty strong case for overall harm.
Yeah, I mean, that's a valid point, Paul. So
sure. Is it a valid point? The idea that he's spreading, so just to put a pin in that, again, the next time we cross paths, Vaush, we can exchange studies ahead of time. And instead of the audience going, I don't know if I should believe Paul or I don't know if I should believe Vaush, we'll pull up the studies on screen and walk through them. Otherwise, it's a he said, she said. But to your point about what is it? He's spreading Nazi, propaganda or something? So I believe you have said that Jordan Peterson is a Nazi, literally. Is that correct?
I think that he enables Nazi ideology. I don't think he's interpersonally a Nazi. I think he's a fascist for sure, though.
I see. You think he's a fascist?
Yeah. He's pretty consistent in this regard, especially with his Daily Wire videos.
What's an example of something that he has put forward that is a fascist idea?
Well, I would say the theory of social degeneracy is a pretty straightforward one to begin with. But if we were to go beyond that point, I would say that his constant talk of cultural Marxism, another Nazi theory, and his obsession with the decay of the West, the decline of the Western civilization, these are very common fascist framings for modern political revival movements. Obviously, his general support of the conservative movement and working for Daily Wire, a fascist organization, doesn't help. I mean, at this point, he essentially works with the fascist press, so that seems pretty direct, as it were. But no, I don't think that he is like a armband and Sieg Heil Nazi or
that's good.
So
that's
on.
good. That would be a bad look for me if he was. I won't lie.
I don't think he's there yet.
That would make this debate much harder on my end.
He'll get there eventually.
Well, I'm glad we're there. Yeah, potentially. Okay. Well, look, I'm aware that this is something you say, so I'll say this. I think I'm the fool for even entertaining this idea that Jordan Peterson is a fascist, but because it's like, okay, it's like Hitler was a fascist. So Jordan Peterson you're using the same word to describe Hitler as Jordan Peterson. On the one hand, it's a bit, I think, but I'll give you space to explain what is your criteria for labeling someone a fascist.
Well, I mean,
whether
JP and Hitler were both nationalists, no?
Well, everyone who loves their country is a nationalist.
Well, then I guess sometimes these terms have wide applicability outside of the most extreme
Yeah,
examples.
but right, and that's I believe this is called equivocation, if I remember my nerd debate bro logic shit, where you use a word that you know doesn't mean what everyone else uses,
Well,
but you
then
get to
Paul,
define
then
it.
Paul, then Paul, you need to get to the point.
I think he's fine to say this. I mean it in the sense that you imagine I
Fuck
mean
you,
it.
Andrew.
I mean he is a
Just kidding.
fascist. I'm not dancing around it or beating around the bush with it may
Okay.
be, oh, he's some
So
light version.
okay.
I think
So
that is his
what?
ideology.
Okay, so can you give me you talked about social degeneracy that leads into the trans issues, which we have to discuss at a separate time using studies. There's certainly other reasons you would call him a fascist. Can you give me one example of an idea he has put forward? This is something you should do, or I believe this, that is fascistic.
Well, the main one would be the cultural Marxism bit. Cultural Marxism is just a retooled version of cultural Bolshevism. It's the same conspiracy theory. The idea that the West, in the old case Germany, of course, but now the West, is being destroyed via elite groups of liberal academics who hate America and often hate white people, and are using their
Some of
power
them
and
do,
influence to
but go ahead.
corrupt us from within.
Sure.
Frankfurt School stuff, that kind of business. Oh, he did recently agree with Putin. Putin said that the invasion of Ukraine was justifiable because it was a way of preventing the spread of liberal degeneracy into Russia. And I believe JP said, and I quote, like, and who could blame him? Because he was talking broadly about like crazy lefties on Twitter or whatever. And it's like, well, who could blame him doing an invasion to prevent the right? So stuff like that.
Okay. I think that's complete bullshit that he said, who can blame Putin for invading Ukraine? He might have used that phrase in some other, like, Putin, like many people, are worried about the direction of the West. And for example, all of the weird, the decline of Western civilization, which is like, I don't see any difference between saying Western civilization is declining and pointing out we're in late stage capitalism. So to me, it's like to say that one's a conspiracy, but one's a progressive point doesn't make any sense.
Well, the question will be, why is Western civilization declining? Because late-stage capitalist theory
Sure.
is just an analysis of the economic conditions we're living under.
Well, let's talk about the cultural Marxism thing, because that's fun and silly in my opinion. So, okay, you said cultural Marxism. Jordan Peterson has used the term cultural Marxism. He really uses the term postmodern neo-Marxism a bit more, which we can talk about postmodernism, because you yourself are a postmodernist, correct?
Probably. It's complicated. But yeah, I'm highly sympathetic to their influences.
That sounds like something a postmodernist would say, but that's fair. So the implication is Jordan Peterson. First off, I disagree that he's using culture. When Jordan Peterson talks about cultural Marxism, he's not referencing a Nazi conspiracy. He's referring to the impact of Marxism on culture, which is exactly what it sounds like.
Which is what the Nazis were talking about.
Okay, well, the Nazis were not big fans of, well, Israel didn't exist yet, but the Nazis were not big fan of Jewish people. And it's like, okay, if Ilhan Omar pushes for BDS, boycott, divest, sanction Israel, does that make her a Nazi because she agreed with Nazis?
Well, I don't think there's anything wrong with protesting Israel, but if she was an anti-Semite, I would say that's definitely a parallel between her and the Nazis.
Yeah, but the evidence that you're citing for Jordan Peterson being an anti-Semite is that he's repeating the talking points of Nazis. And I could just as easily say anyone who criticizes Israel is repeating the talking points of Nazis.
I'm only saying it's the same conspiracy theory. The idea that Frankfurt School academic intellectual communists infiltrated American culture and are destroying it from within. That's what I want to know. Why do people believe the West is in decline? I'm not entirely sure if I understand that. Our GDP is skyrocketing compared to that of China's, India's, and, well, broadly the rest of the world's. We have the strongest military. I don't know what people mean when they say the West is in decline.
For a Marxist, that's a remarkably capitalist defense of the growth of the West, saying that the GDP has gone up. I believe life expectancy is going down. Mental health issues are increasing rapidly. People are deleting themselves to be TOS friendly at increasing rates. There's more and more polarization. The idea that what are people referring to when the civilization has decline? To me, that's an indication of how you might not be paying attention as close as you could, because
Well,
I think it's
I do.
obvious that there are a
I
lot of
mean,
issues.
I'm being kind
Well,
of facetious here. I know that when people talk about the West being in decline, they're usually talking about cultural Marxism, immigration, Muslims, and leftism. I see a lot of West is in decline stuff whenever you see like drag queens, for example, because the West is in decline because they're wearing frilly clothing, for example. I hear the West is in decline in response to a lot of stuff. If the West was
okay.
truly in decline over mental health issues, I'm not entirely sure why conservatives are so opposed to the concept of SSRIs or therapy broadly. It seems
Well,
like,
certainly Jordan Peterson is the opposite of that. He specifically says that if you've got mental health issues, you should give SSRIs a try. And
sure,
he's a clinical therapist himself.
in that respect, he might be better than the average conservative milieu, but the fear
Might be a
mongering about the
slightly
West being in
kind Nazi,
decline.
but not
Hmm?
a slightly kind Nazi, but not an all the way bad one.
Oh, he
If
is.
he's
I stand by the fascist accusation. Again, he talks about cultural Marxism on and on and on and on and on.
okay, so
The,
are people who support Jordan Peterson, does that make them fascist by implication?
No, I mean, I think it means they like a fascist, but unfortunately, in the current political climate, it seems pretty difficult to avoid that if you're even mildly tolerant of like center-leaning media, because there's a lot of people there who are kind of like edging on the side of things.
Okay. Okay. The reason I'm pondering for a moment is because you understand what you're saying, what you've been saying the past few minutes is very different from what you say in many of your videos. Would you agree?
Well, I call him a fascist in those videos too.
Well, you say uh, you say a variety of things about like conservatives in general, like that what is it? They're no different from the KK. Conservatives today are no different from the KKK in the who were, I think the quote was, frothing at the mouth, um, keeping black people away from integrated schools. You said that, and now it seems like you are not standing by those beliefs and taking it back and hiding your power level a bit.
No, I still stand with whatever it was I said back there. I don't think there's much of an ideological difference between a modern American conservative and a member of the Ku Klux Klan. It's just a continuation of existing ideals. It's not exactly like a conspiracy that there was like this huge wave of Ku Klux Klan support that was kind of backed by conservative politicians at the time. Those politicians lasted a long time too, and a lot of their ideological forebears, right up until the Civil Rights Movement, they were pretty open and friendly with a lot of really obviously anti-black stuff. And then Civil Rights Movement happens, the act gets passed, and can't say the N-word anymore. But a lot of the same people stayed in office, and a lot of their children and friends ran and won in their offices later, and it makes you wonder just how much stuff they kept bottled up. At any rate, the ideology is still remarkably similar. Xenophobia and nativism are the big driving forces of modern conservatism, and I think Jordan Peterson plays into that quite a lot as well, largely with the cultural Marxism bit.
Okay, the reason I'm not being as warm and welcoming as I could otherwise be is what you said. The implication of what you said is that, for example, my conservative friends and family members are no different than the Ku Klux Klan. Do you understand why that limits the degree to which I can take a lot of the other things you say seriously, and why many people in general don't take as much as you say seriously as they might otherwise?
Well, I'm not trying to hide in audacity. I think it's a fairly straightforward assessment of where modern American conservatism is. I mean, do you think that families of the Ku Klux Klan back 120 years ago didn't talk with each other as normal people? Everybody thinks they're normal, right? But obviously, with
But it's
retrospect,
just us with conservative friends and family members who are literally as bad as the Ku Klux Klan today. That's what you're saying. The
what
Ku
do you
Klux
think?
Klan who burned down the homes of black people with black children in them
Mhm.
and hung them. You're saying my friends and family members, people watching this who have friends and family members who are conservative, they're just as bad. That's what you're saying.
Well, nowadays, you would instead cheer on a racist policing system that's used to disproportionately inflict violence against black people. So you've sort of delegated the violence to a system, a very expensive one at that. Sheesh, at least the taxes didn't pay for the KKK. But fundamentally, I think that the parallels remain there. They're not the same in terms of like the exact
Okay.
extent of the harm they commit interpersonally. Obviously, I'm talking about ideological synchronicity. But yeah,
Sure.
no, I mean, the modern American conservative, right, this is a template of fascism. If I believe, for example, that Ron DeSantis and Trump are both fascists, which I do, and the GOP is a fascist org, why would I not believe then that conservatives in America today are themselves, I mean, at least fascist sympathizers, right? Like, not individually, every single one of them is like an ideological fascist, but they're, at the very
Mhm.
least, they're part of the movement. It's not meant as an
Okay.
insult. Obviously, I disagree with it, but I think
It's
it's
not meant
important
as
to
an
recognize it.
insult. Hey, you and your friends and family who might have voted for Trump, they're as bad as the KKK. You don't understand why people would take that as an insult?
Ideologically descendant of the KKK. You can take it as an
Oh.
insult, but I think we have
Oh,
to
I see.
we
It's
have to
much
reach that
better.
middle ground before we can have any
You're
reasonable
not a Ku
discussion on
Klux
fascism.
Klan member who hates black people. You're just an ideological descendant of a Ku Klux Klan member who hates black people. I think that is a condescending defense of an indefensible position.
Well, it's not meant. I'm not meant to be Weasley when I say that. I just genuinely think that is the case, right? I mean, like we would have to acknowledge, for example, that
S- s-
the conservative parties in modern day Germany would have had ideological roots in Nazis, right?
Hold on,
The
hold on.
conservative party, the current leader of Italy, for example, literally like a direct lineage of the supporters of Mussolini. So I think it would be fair then to say the people who voted for her would be ideologically in line with
Yes,
that,
I,
right?
I understand the formula of the argument you're making. You
Right.
said you genuinely believe in what you're saying. So you're saying, do you have any friends? Do you hang out with anyone who is a fascist or a conservative, although it's the same word? Do you have any friends who are? Yeah, I'll leave it open because
There are a couple of online people I talk to friendly who are,
okay.
I would
So
consider such, yes.
okay, so if you believe that conservatives are literally Ku Klux Klan members, literally ideological descendants, we'll keep it tight. Why are you hanging out with them?
Well, I don't think
What
there's
does that
anything.
say about you and your character?
I mean, some people might disagree. There are people on the left who get mad at me, by the way. They got mad at me for being friends with Shu, still do. They're mad at me for all sorts of things. Um, but their opinions aren't really what matters here, right? I don't think it morally compromises me to have a friendly conversation with a person of any ideological disposition. I've never been the kind of person who thought that every interaction you have with somebody you disagree with has to be like a shouting match or anything. But I feel like this is genuinely not directed as an insult, okay? So whatever
I
you
don't
may
believe
think,
that.
okay, here, out of curiosity, what do you think of communism? Of the ideology, what do you think? Of its
Um,
lineage, of its effect?
there are some things I like better than communism.
Some things.
Yeah, like ice cream.
Okay, gotcha. But you would probably put it below the 50-50 par, right?
Probably. That's a fair statement.
So whatever associations you may have with communism, you could fairly draw that line to me for my ideology and its precedent, whatever use you'd think you would get out of this discussion for it, if we were talking about something like that specifically. But my goal here is not, oh, haha, now that I have denounced you as the fascist, we can move on, we can leave, you are bad now. My goal is, these are the ideological roots of where you're coming from. This is like the groundwork.
So what
of
is
the
your
base.
goal? Is your goal, I'm just a genuine question. And let me just say, I have a lot of thoughts based on the last 15, 20 minutes of our conversation. I have said specifically that I do not think that you are a uniquely bad person, or you're not capable of any unique level of harm that anyone else is, right? You've had cameras on, you have a huge audience. So naturally, the impact of everything you say is going to be worse, but there's nothing unique per se about you. In fact, that's central to Jordan Peterson's whole body of work, is that each of us have the capacity to be a Nazi camp guard. And had we been in Weimar, Germany, it's likely that most of us would. And so you have to understand that capacity for harm. And so the reason I sympathize with what you just said about, just because you disagree with someone doesn't mean you need to have a screaming match with them or whatnot. You can still be friends with them. And I'm to the degree that I'm able, I'm trying to engage with you honestly for the same reason. But I guess it confuses me, because if you are genuinely interested in, let's say, combating fascism, then it seems like you would recognize that calling people's friends and family KKK members, or equivalent to the KKK, equivalent to people who lynched black people, that would impede your goal of trying to get to a common understanding. Is that not reasonable? Is that not a reasonable critique that one could levy against you?
Well, the problem is, I think the opposite has actually been the case. The aversion to calling, a spade has actually been a huge detriment to American politics. We've basically been seeing like the resurgence of a modern American fascist movement being built up like brick by brick. And this entire time we've been thinking, oh, it's hyperbolic to call it this. It's over the top. You're God-lawing the entire conversation. It's worthless. You're being silly. You're ostracizing people. And right now, Ron DeSantis is threatening felony charges for teachers who have degenerate material in their books by which any mention of sexuality or gender, providing government-backed white lists for stuff they're allowed to show. And it's like, oh, that's literally just like a Nazi policy, like explicitly, straightforwardly, like you will be held to account if you spread degeneracy to the school children. Degeneracy,
sure, which Jordan Peterson has condemned the attempts of Ron DeSantis to censor critical race theory. So that would put him squarely on the opposite end of the fascist spectrum.
But he does, nonetheless, attack, in this case, everything that the left has to do with gender, sexuality, trans people, and the like. I did find the quote, by the way, when he was talking about Putin and Ukraine and Putin's reasoning for invading Ukraine. He did literally describe the U.S. ideology of gender ideology, gender norms as degenerate. He actually said the word, which I didn't remember, but
sure, he didn't say that. He didn't say Elliot Page was degenerate. He didn't call out that name, but he said that the broader movement towards cutting off the breasts of 13-year-olds is degenerate.
No,
I agree with that.
No. He said
that wasn't clear.
He said U.S. culture wars were degenerate. And then he said that it was irresponsible of Elliot Page to exist in public while showcasing that what he is calling degeneracy in this video. So this is directly like Nazi ideology. He's even using the term. We don't have to do any inference on his intentions. It's pretty straightforward.
Again, I think if you accept that there is a concerning trend of children having medical procedures performed on them.
There isn't.
And that, again, separate debate, and we'll pull up the studies and we'll see who's right rather than who sounds more confident when they assert it. Hold on. Let's go back to what you were saying about you need to call a spade a spade. Okay, here is why I think what you are doing is very detrimental to the conversation in general. It's called syndrome, and I coined it. So for those people watching, you may be hearken back to the Incredibles movie in which the primary villain named Syndrome, there's a scene in which he has imprisoned the Incredibles, and he says to them, he reveals his master plan. He says, when I'm old, I will sell all my inventions and the inventions that made me super, and then I will give them to the world. And when everyone's super, no one will be. And that's syndrome. When you use a word so broadly that it means everything and nothing at the same time, you actually allow the people who identify with that word to get a free pass. It's like what the Republicans do with communism. Oh, you want to raise the minimum wage? That's communism. That's socialism. Or it's what the left does with racism. Oh, there's a disparity of any kind. That's racism. I can't even think of the thousands of examples. I know you've made videos about all the weird racist shit that the left does. And, they assume everything is possible is racist. It's the same point. And you using the word fascist, which, again, this is one of those examples of everyone watching this who doesn't already agree with you or know what you're saying. They hear fascist and they think Adolf Hitler. And you're saying, well, no, I mean fascist in this very unique way. And I want to call a spade a spade. And it's like, okay, all you're doing is allowing the real fascists. Oh, hello?
Hello.
Oh, my screen went out. All you're doing is allowing the real fascists to get away basically scot-free because, oh, well, they're calling everyone a fascist now. So we can actually bring our real fascist ideology into the mix. I think Nick Fuentes is precisely as influential as he is because people have been so imprecise with calling out their opponents as being fascist or just being wrong. And
Nick Fuentes is not
the situation that we're in.
Nick Fuentes is not unique in his ideology. Even some of his cohorts were
he's
saying...
He's a real fascist.
Well, no. Even some of his cohorts were saying one of the reasons why he's so obsessed with saying racial slurs and screaming about Jews is because he has to distinguish himself from somebody who is otherwise identical to him, Charlie Kirk. See, this is the issue with what you're saying. You bring indignation, But in reality, the ideology, you say fascism is some unique thing? No. Fascism
the
is
way
one of
you use it is unique.
No, I don't. I use it by its standardized definitions, or at least one of
Yes.
them, because all
Jordan
political
Peterson is a
ideologies have.
fascist.
Yes. See, all you offer is indignation. Liberalism is the dominant ideology of this planet, but it is followed very closely in second by fascism. If you take a look all over the world, China, India, Turkmenistan, the idea of ultranatalist, xenophobic, bigoted, ultranationalist, this isn't an uncommon
None of those
ideology.
apply to Jordan Peterson, and he explicitly calls all of those out.
He calls
Ultranationalist,
the
Jordan
terms-
Peterson.
So this is the problem with Jordan Peterson. It's one of the reasons why talking about his ideology is frustrating. He terminologically,
Sure.
he distinguishes himself not only from fascism, but conservatism. And then you take a look at his videos in the Daily Wire, and he's screeching about how the West is going to fall because of degeneracy of sexuality and gender inflicted by liberals. And it's like, oh, this isn't at all distinct from actual neo-Nazi propaganda.
So you're a consequentialist, correct? You evaluate people by the consequences of their actions. Is
Sure.
that fair to say?
Yes.
Okay. So if someone supports Jordan Peterson, does that not make them you just told me, you just laid out as clear as day from your perspective why Jordan Peterson is a fascist. Even a Nazi, because he's not just a fascist, he's repeating Nazi conspiracy.
Well, I don't think
theories.
he's a Nazi. I think he's repeating Nazi
But he called
theories,
Elliot Page a degenerate. Why doesn't that make him a Nazi?
because I don't think that being a Nazi is just employing Nazis' theories on degeneracy. I think that you would need to fill a higher criteria than that.
Good answer. Okay, but he is a fascist, correct?
Oh yeah, he cleanly meets that criteria.
Right, cleanly. So why? So if I, knowing this, for example, give money to Jordan Peterson by buying his products, like his self-authoring suite, am I not a fascist by supporting someone who is explicitly a fascist, knowing that he is a fascist?
No, I mean, I pay taxes
not?
to the U.S. government. That doesn't necessarily make me its supporter.
Okay, that's not your choice. But
uh,
if you donated to someone who was a communist party, would that not pretty clearly make you at least a communist sympathizer?
It'd be indicative. I think that there are reasons why people like Jordan Peterson.
All right, we're getting closer.
There are reasons why people like Jordan Peterson that aren't his fascism. However, these days especially, and it would be less so the case like 5 years ago, but these days especially, he is primarily associated with conservatism first and foremost. It's his videos, his tweets, the material he produces is that of pushing fascist conservative politics.
Okay.
And to that end, I think it's getting more and more difficult to appreciate him for reasons other than that. It's possible, though. I don't mean to completely denounce it. There are a lot of people I see sometimes in his YouTube comment sections under some of his videos who come across as politically unmotivated, but largely okay people. You can never really tell from a YouTube comment, but it's totally possible.
That's fair. That's fair. Okay. Well, I mean, again, what confuses me in this debate is how confidently you assert. You said I only bring indignation to the conversation. It seems like you're doing the same thing where you say he's panicking about the decline of the West. He's repeating Nazi conspiracy theories. He's supporting fascist ideology. He's xenophobe, whatever. You gave all of these reasons indignantly and made it obvious. And then I ask, well, okay, if I say knowing all that, or at least having heard you said that, if I continue to support Jordan Peterson, how am I not also a fascist sympathizer?
Well, might be. I mean, it seems to me
how is anyone who supports Jordan Peterson, let's say financially, not also a fascist sympathizer if they know all the things that you said?
Because they might not sympathize with his fascist views. They might just like him for other reasons. If we're assessing people by the consequences,
despite that, you're saying it's so if someone is a literal Nazi ideologue or close to a fascist ideologue, excuse me, I don't want to be imprecise with my words. If someone is a fascist ideologue, and I know that, and I choose to buy their products, there's nothing wrong with that from a consequentialist perspective.
No,
I
do think there's something wrong with it. What you're talking about right now is like the ethics of boycotting, and I don't really care that much about boycotting. I buy Coca-Cola products, even though they've funded death squads in Latin America. I mean, I've bought Nestle products, even though they've done horrible shit in West Africa. I'm not big on the boycotting stuff. I mean, I guess it's good to avoid it if you can, but it's not. Yeah, I don't know if it's good like line to run down. But there are lots of people who support him for his political ideology. I mean, that would probably be like the majority of people who support him at this point. I mean, if I go like to the recent Daily Wire videos, he's not exactly unpopular in that side of things, right?
Sure. Well, there's all kinds of people who are not exactly unpopular that on either side. It doesn't say anything about anything they're saying.
Well, I mean, we agree, if nothing else, that Jordan Peterson is a conservative. It's pretty hard to avoid.
Not really. I mean, he talked,
Really?
for example, Jordan Peterson specifically says, just as an example, this is a very simple, straightforward issue. Jordan Peterson explicitly says being gay is not a sin. And the fundamentalists who claim that and try to convert people are wrong. If he was a fascist, why would he not agree with that?
So
why would he not consider that degeneracy?
So this is one of the problems with Peterson directly. So I'm going to leave aside obvious explanations like he's lying for optics, which I don't actually think is the case here.
Well, why'd you say that was an obvious explanation then?
Because it's always possible. I can't prove it's not the case, and conservatives lie all the time. But I don't actually think that's what's happening here. I think
we all lie all the time, but yeah, go ahead.
Well, there are liars all across the board, but here on the Daily Wire, unfortunately, it seems to be a prerequisite for employment. I think in his case, there's a kind of incoherence, and I actually see this decently often. Have you ever heard of the phrase, hate the sin, love the sinner?
I have, yes.
So it's a conservative religious mantra, right? Well, don't hate gay people, okay? The act of sodomy is wrong, but gay people themselves are fine. The problem is, people who say, love the sinner, hate the sin, or whatever, don't actually usually love the sinner. In fact, I remember, and you can look at this back to the 1980s where it was really common, that phrase, that attitude was often used as a way of scapegoating. It was like, oh, I'm not hateful towards you, just towards sodomy. Now get in the camp. You know, it was like a, hey, all of our bigoted behavior here is purely a product of our ideological bias against an action, not you as a person. And I think in a lot of cases, this is what we see here. So Jordan Peterson will call gender ideology degenerate, talk about how it's irresponsible for trans people to exist in public because it's corrupting the youth, and say that he sympathizes with Vladimir Putin for trying to keep Western degeneracy out. Putin, of course, being the leader who presided over a number of anti-gay laws in Russia. But and then he'll say, well, I don't think homosexuality is a sin. My answer to this is, of course, I don't buy it. Being a part of the Daily Wire, which is full of people who, literally full, like all of them, want to get rid of gay marriage, standing toe-to-toe with them, supporting conservative candidacies and their general ideological bent. Whatever he says here doesn't matter to me. It's the effect of his actions.
Didn't you just say that you are friends with conservatives because you don't believe in what, just shouting at people? Hold on, there's a couple things you said. First off, just as a point, Jordan Peterson joining the Daily Wire, I was not a fan of that. But if he's the one to sneak and Trojan horse evolutionary theory into the Daily Wire audience, I'm fine with that. Evaluating on the consequences of his actions, I want as many religious people to buy into the theory of evolution as possible so they stop believing in ideas that I would regard as nonsense. So from a consequentialist point of view, he's got that point.
Well, he hasn't made videos on evolution. He's certainly made videos on transgender people, though.
98% of every single thing he says is a reference back to evolutionary theory. So I don't know what you're talking about there.
Wait, do you think 98% of his videos are on evolutionary theory, or do you think he makes videos on other topics?
Every single statement that he makes talking about moral injunctions and why everything he says is conditioned and constantly referred back to from the framework of evolutionary theory, indisputably.
Yeah, I don't think that's... to whatever extent this makes the Daily Wire audience more amicable to evolutionary theory is largely irrelevant to me. I'm more concerned with what he was brought on board to actually do. It's a political advocacy network, after all. It's not like a general content creation network. They bring him on board, and he talks about conservative stuff. That's what he's been doing. He hasn't been arguing with his contemporaries on evolutionary theory. He hasn't been challenging their preconceptions on religious doctrine. He's been going there, and he's been towing the party line, right? That's what he's paid to do.
I think I'll save it for the Q&A. I'm tempted to pull up a clip, and I can just say it, but if you don't believe me, I can pull up the clip. Jordan Peterson says the book of Revelations in the Bible is literally a psychedelic trip, and that all the person did who wrote the book of Revelations is take a psychedelic and write down what he experienced. That is literal apostasy and blasphemy in the church. saying that the book of Revelations, the Bible, was an acid or a mushroom trip. And so that's tip of the spear in terms of the scientific battering that he pushes against religious dogmatism of, oh, well, the earth was created in 6 days. Yeah, you have to throw out the entire theory of evolution. And you say, well, I don't see, this is not consequentially relevant because, the politics are more important. It's like, okay, in your perspective, to me, it's quite clear that consistently educating and articulating why all of the most dogmatic elements of religion, and the Bible in particular, are not necessarily valid is probably a good thing for a largely religious audience to be exposed to.
I think, with respect, I think this is unfathomable cope. The idea that Jordan Peterson is acting as some kind of de-radicalizer for religious fundamentalism by publishing a bunch of videos where he argues about like degeneracy and trans issues and stuff. Like, if that's an angle of his work that you think is appreciable relative to his contemporaries, that's fine. But we're talking about like sometimes like Adolf Hitler went down to the bridge underneath the interstate and he would like pick up trash,
Yeah, that's a laughable comparison. That's
I don't
completely incoherent.
even if he was a full evangelist for evolutionary theory, and I mean to the
Which
point where
he
he was
is.
arguing with, no, I have never seen him argue this with a conservative.
Okay, so, and what does that prove? You clearly haven't watched enough Jordan Peterson then, because he's literally telling fundamentalists, you are swallowing a bunch of lies.
And
have you seen him say that?
and
I
it doesn't
pull 3 clips of him back to back.
It doesn't
shitting on fundamentalists.
It doesn't seem
not that extreme,
to
but
prevent him from mingling with Christian nationalists. So it seems like
Right.
the
Well,
political
maybe-
outcome of this behavior is kind of irrelevant to me.
Or maybe his continued prolonged discussions with those people would draw them out of their religious dogmatism.
But they're still fascists. Why would I?
Okay.
Would it be
I
that I
forgot that was still a
prefer?
line you could just pull.
I mean,
Fascists.
well, no. I mean, like, really think about what you're saying. What you're saying is, okay, when he advocates fascist political policies, he does so in a way that employs a doctrine of analysis that suggests an adherence to evolutionary theory. And if we just let him advocate for fascism for a few more years, he will eventually make the people he works with semi-secular fascists rather than Christian nationalist fascists.
He's not advocating for fascism at all. Again, you are using this word in a way that, oh, well, he's again, we have to have the discussion about like degeneracy is a strong word. And it's like,
Agree,
okay,
he probably shouldn't use it. Only I should be using it.
maybe that's fair. Let me make a point, because you said something, and I know we're 50 minutes till break.
Don't mind that. Just mind what's going on in front of you.
You said, and this is an example of why I think you are completely underestimate. You have a overly reductive view of things that clouds your judgment, and is why you have such contradictory perspectives. That Jordan Peterson is this super fascist, but even if you support him, well, you're not really a fascist, and all these different things.
You might be.
You said, yeah, everyone might be everything. You said that religious people, you said love the sin or hate the sin. Religious people use that as a rationalization for actually hating the sinner, right? They say that, but they actually want to go after the person who's gay. Is that more or less what you said?
Yes.
Okay. I think that's completely wrong. I think most of the homophobic people who would, for example, send their child to gay conversion camp, which is just as egregious of a sin as sending a child to undergo gender surgery, given the wildly insufficient data supporting either of those two treatments.
We have data on the effect
the reason
of
people
transition.
Separate debate. We can have that, and I want to have that, whether it's you or whoever's watching. That's an open challenge. We'll do the debates. You said they're doing it so they can just hate the sinner. The whole reason that I think many families are homophobic, for example, are because they genuinely believe that if their child is gay, that child will go to hell. And if you genuinely believe that your child will go to hell, if you really love that child, then you would do everything in your power to prevent that. And I think that's exactly the same mentality that parents who transition their child who believe, look, I genuinely believe that a 13-year-old child is in a position to determine their gender. There's many medical associations that push that. You push that. And it's not unreasonable why people would believe that. But that does not absolve them of the responsibility and the consequence of claiming that or sending their child to gay conversion therapy or sending their child to go get gender transition. That still is ultimately going to harm the child. But to say that it's not coming from a position of love, which is ironic, and you say, well, how can that be a position of love? It's because many children have suffered at the hands of their parents when their parents thought they were doing the best thing for their child. And for you to say it's just a rationalization for them to exercise their homophobia is an unbelievably reductive take. And I think it just illustrates the degree to which you are severely overcomplicating or wildly simplifying all of these issues. And it's, again, why it's hard to take anything you say seriously when you say, well, Jordan Peterson's repeating Nazi conspiracy theories. It's like, okay, so is he a Nazi? He interviewed Benjamin Netanyahu and basically rolled over and let Netanyahu spew whatever he wanted to. I'm not a fan of Benjamin Netanyahu, but to say, well, he basically shills for Israel, but he also is a Nazi. It's like,
But I
okay.
didn't say he was a Nazi. I said he's a fascist. Netanyahu, by the way, is also a giant fascist. It's funny that you would make that comparison because Netanyahu is an excellent example of how
I could actually agree with that more so than Jordan. Hold on. You said Jordan Peterson repeats Nazi conspiracy points.
So does Netanyahu, by the way.
PF, you said a lot. Let Vaush respond.
Okay.
Oh, I just want to say, so does Netanyahu. Netanyahu is a Holocaust revisionist, which is absolutely a neo-Nazi thing. I don't think Netanyahu is a Nazi, but he's made the argument that actually Adolf Hitler wasn't going to genocide the Jews. The only people who gave him the advice to do so were the Arabs. See, modern Israelis don't like Arabs that much. Obviously, that's their main geopolitical enemy. So he wanted to transfer the hatred and the misery of being victimized by the Holocaust onto a new ethnic group. That weaponization of the Holocaust, not to mention, revising its history, that's the kind of thing a Nazi would do. Netanyahu, leader of Israel, just did it for his own reasons. And that would be an example of a fascist who employs Nazi techniques without himself being a fascist.
You mean a Nazi?
Oh, sorry, without being a Nazi. Yes, thank you. Yeah, I don't think that Jordan Peterson's a Nazi, but the stuff that he says is absolutely fascist. The Nazis were fascist, far from the only ones. Fascism is remarkably common world around. We had a nice resurgence of liberal democracy sometime after World War II, and maybe more broadly since the fall of the Soviet Union. But honest to God, there is plenty of room in the world for fascist ideology to spread. I don't think it's exceptional to say that so-and-so figure is this or that a group of people is motivated by ideologies which, directly inform the stuff they do and say now. People say all the time, I'm not racist, but. I'm not sexist, but. Nobody wants to look like the bigot, but a lot of people are anyway. I mean, God almighty, if you could go back and look at some of the media coming out around the time of Dr. Martin Luther King's marches, on Washington, you would see so many people. Listen, I'm not a racist. I'm not against equality. However, and they would contrive the most inexplicable arguments to justify how they happen to agree with the racists on everything, but not because they're racist. Right. And I think we see this all the time. And JP, my squirrely friend, is particularly good at not directly attaching himself to any label or ideology, even though his actual messaging seems to be pretty consistent.
Can you be a fascist and also a good person?
In other than in a political
in your
sense?
world, in the way that you are using the word, can you be a fascist and a good person?
Yeah, because I have a utilitarian framework. If a person is ideologically fascist but never acts on it and only acts on other impulses that are good, I would have to say that is a good person. If I was using a what is the term? The ethical there's another framework where you try to analyze people based on their internal worlds. They're
deontological.
No. It's virtue ethics. Virtue ethics. That's right.
I believe that's a subset of deontology.
It might be. Yeah, I've never studied up in it, but I might care more about what's going on in their head. That being said, most people with fascist beliefs would act on those beliefs. Of course, it would inform their behavior.
If there is any takeaway from this debate, it is syndrome. Most people, when they use the word fascist, mean not a good person, like Nazi. Most people use Nazi and fascist interchangeably. Now, you've added some nuance, which is fair. And if I a priori accepted your definition of fascism, sure, we could agree. But what you are doing is you use a word that you know is not in any way used by the average person to then say, well, Jordan Peterson's a fascist, but you don't say, well, you can be a good person and be a fascist, which I think is nonsense at least in my definition of fascism, which is interesting. So the fact that you have a definition of fascism that is more digestible and has more room for being a good person, I would argue actually, like I said, facilitates the rise of fascism, because I think it's a terrible thing that should be limited, and you should have a word to describe a specific phenomenon that needs to be called out.
But
you
it
don't do
isn't a
that.
specific phenomenon. It's a broad cluster of social and political influences. It's
Not
kind
to
of
most people.
well,
No,
most people.
not to the audience that you have, the size of your audience. You know full well that most people, when you say Jordan Peterson's a fascist, you are invoking a idea that Jordan Peterson is like Hitler, who was also a fascist.
I explain my ideology to my audience. The problem is most people, if we want to talk about the normal person, what is the average person's definition of capitalism? The average person is retarded. They couldn't give a consistent definition of capitalism, of mercantilism, of liberalism. If you asked the average person what their definition of liberal was, or of socialist or communist, why should we defer to their definition? The definition for fascism that I use is from Umberto Eco's 14 Points, a kind of broad guide for the social tendencies that indicate fascism, because it's an incoherent ideology. It's naturally incoherent. It's one of its components. It seeks to disguise itself as other ideologies, to borrow and break and recompose. The Nazis did this. The Nazis fronted themselves as a pro-worker, pro-poverty party. Seriously. Some of the most, the demographics they were most popular with back in Weimar Germany were unemployed German workers following the Great Depression, which is nonsensical because in reality, they massively privatized and didn't give a shit about the poor after they took power. But they lied, fascists lie, right? Big whoop on that one. I'm not looking to be incoherent. I really don't care about the definition of this, though. I'm really more concerned with the individual moral rightness and wrongness of the positions that Jordan Peterson has. They are fascist. I certainly think they are. But even if we took away the label and we're just like, okay, in a vacuum, what do these things do? What do they mean? Well, I would still say they're very harmful. Fascism, in this respect, is more of a reference or a shorthand. But you couldn't, ideally, you should always be able to ethically justify something without using a label. You should always be able to go back to basics.
I don't know. I don't think the average person is retarded, nor do I think that they're equivalent to a KKK member if they happen to be conservative. It's very difficult for me to have to engage at the level that you are certainly capable of engaging on. When you make these claims in the same sentence, the average person's retarded, most conservatives are, all conservatives are absolutely the same as KKK members.
Ideological
There's an
descendants
impediment.
That's a meaningful
That's not
distinction.
what you said. That's not what you said. Do you want me to read the quote that you said about conservatives?
Sure, you're free to. But I've clarified in this conversation. They're ideologically descendant of.
You have clarified in this conversation. So now that you've clarified, let me ask you this. Will you, going forward, now that you've clarified, assuming you recognize your mistake, will you go after this conversation, will you continue to make videos where you say things like conservatives are the same as the KKK?
Well, I might say stuff like, this is just like the KKK when I'm making like a broader analogy. My goal there isn't to be literal, right? I'm obviously trying to draw comparisons with specific aspects of their ideology. But yeah, you can make a direct comparison between some of the actions of the KKK terrorist group and like modern day, like rural NIMBYism, or like
Yep.
the an unwillingness to provide space in cities and accommodate black or brown people. There's a line there. That the line doesn't mean that they're like one-to-one, but the line definitely exists, right? If you, like, for example, you take a look at what the KKK believed in, right? They were the terrorist group, sure. But the stuff they did, lots of people in the South back then agreed with it. I mean, that was kind of the point. They weren't like outlaws and hated by all the white folk down there in the South. I mean, a lot of people, that was the whole point of Birth of the Nation, right? Like, they were sympathized with. They were thought of as heroes. They kept black control from spreading too far. And if you think, okay, if Birth of a Nation, a movie just idealizing the Ku Klux Klan, can be popular at the beginning of the 20th century, and some of those folks then went on to live to the 1950s, 60s, 70s after loving that movie when they were a kid, where does the line stop? Like, where does that connection break? And I think you can make a clear case that a lot of the reasons why folks liked that were the same they opposed Martin Luther King, the same reason they opposed forced busing, same reason they opposed a lot of stuff. And if you run it up, we're right here in modern American politics. It doesn't mean that it's just like Klan members thawed out of ice, but like there's a line there, and you got to pay attention to it too. People, they have short memories. You let these ideologies die off. What just happened in Germany? Those Reichsbürger people tried to institute a new such and such because they wanted to build a Fourth Reich. They weren't even sympathetic to the Nazis. They were sympathetic to the goddamn monarchy before the Nazis. So it's like, you take a look at those analyses from the German government of how many of their police and military have far-right militias where they want to reestablish the Fourth Reich, often like the forests and stuff. I'm just saying, you can't believe these ideologies die off. They're always there and they're always waiting, and you have to be
I've got one point, Andrew. This is the last point.
No, make it in your closing statement.
So I rambled like crazy there. I'll have
Can
a
I
2
get 30
second.
seconds?
You get
30 seconds.
30 seconds.
Everything you just said sounded so very reasonable. And this is what you said 10 months ago. There are no good conservatives. If you have conservative friends and family, they are part of the problem. They are exactly the same as the KKK white nationalists who ran terror campaigns and who threw rocks at black people. Everything you just said, which was so very well articulated and very, oh, well, this makes sense, is, I don't know which Vaush I'm talking to. Am I talking to the one who tried to seem reasonable there, or the one who said the conservatives are the same as the KKK? This is my problem in this conversation.
All right, gentlemen, we're going to move into closing statements. Is Paul open first? I'm going to let him close last. Vaush, I'm going to let you close first. You have 7 minutes on the clock. Go ahead.
Won't need all of it. I rambled for a good bit there. That was absolutely hyperbole. I defend the underlying intent. I'm always willing to clarify if asked. I think that my channel, for the most part, has been pretty consistent in indicating a non-essentialist attitude towards people's ideologies. I mean, I created the channel based on the idea that there were a lot of like alt-righters out there who just needed to be yelled at a little bit, and they might be pulled over to being a good person. And if I believe that, then fundamentally I have to believe in the idea of people changing. I mean, if the worst interpretation of my message there is a kind of like essentialist denunciation of modern conservatives, or the idea they actually are the Ku Klux Klan, like they're all out there burning houses and shit, obviously I don't believe that. But I do believe we have to be kind of a watchdog for the ideological, development, even if it goes underground for a bit. I mean, we're seeing things rise back up right now.
Is that the end of your closing, Vaush?
Yes, that's all I need.
Okay. Paul, go ahead. You have 7 minutes on the clock.
Let's see. I did not prepare a closing statement because I did not know how this conversation was going to go. And admittedly, there was a wide range of ways it could have gone. Here is why I wanted to have this conversation. I said earlier, Jordan Peterson is a net positive because even though he's said bad stuff, overall he does good. Vaush, I have said on multiple occasions, I think you actually do a lot of good in spite of or alongside of all the dumb stuff you say that I think was made clear in this debate. For example, I know your audience, you give a lot of like actually good practical advice to a lot of, I think like teenagers and whatnot who, are socially awkward or struggle or whatnot. And when people say, oh, well, Vaush is just this or Vaush is just that, we should just ignore him and not speak to him. It's like, okay, I think that's stupid because if you were as bad as people make you out to be, or rather, if you were defined by your worst, dumbest statements, then you would be a terrible person. But I've seen you say a lot of reasonable, good things. And the part of the reason I wanted to have this conversation, I don't know exactly, but is to at least make that clear and to see if we could have kind of an agreement. But again, the difficulty of that is when I've watched your videos and I obviously have seen the most hyperbolic stuff you say, and whether or not that's actually reflective of what you believe or not, it's kind of like, well, the only hope that I think you have is if you stop living this contradiction where you say these one things and then you come into these debates, which I thought was extremely, aside from you saying things I strongly disagreed with, let's say, I mean, this is like a respectful conversation. I think it could actually be productive. We didn't get to go into the merits of postmodernism and, moral anti-realism versus, objective realism in a non, I guess, emotionally charged way, probably in part my issue, but there are a lot of bad things going on in the world. And I do think that we need to turn the temperature down and have a conversation. And to your point, you should still call a spade. And that's why I'm not being, the nicest person I could otherwise be. But I also think it's important to actually acknowledge you are more than capable of reason. You're more than capable of doing the right thing. And I would hope to elicit that from you rather than do the easy thing, which is, oh, well, Vaush is just in his own bubble and he can go F himself. And it's like, time will tell whether or not I'm the fool or I'm right. So, but I really do appreciate this conversation. So thank you.
Is that the end of your closing there?
That's the end of my closing statement. Yeah.
Okay. Gentlemen, I appreciate very much you guys coming on this fine evening. We have a bunch of callers to get to, and we have a bunch of super chats to get to. I don't fully expect that this debate is actually going to stop. Sometimes the callers and super chats will lead us into kind of different avenues. So not going to close it up just yet. I did have kind of one question though before I got to the callers. I do tend to ask questions. I take notes the entire debate. One of the points that you said, Vaush, was that you were a moral anti-realist and a utilitarian. Do you consider those two things to be compatible?
Yeah, 100%. It just means I don't think there's an objective basis for the axioms that I use as a metric for determining what's good or bad.
So why should anybody trust them?
I don't think you can make an objective argument there. I think you can make an intersubjective argument, the idea that most people will have axioms that prioritize human well-being, for example, but I don't think you can make a fundamentally objective argument, the same way you could make a mathematical argument. I don't think you can make that for morals.
So is it more preference based then for why you think that axiom is what people should move to? It's
yes.
Okay, gotcha. All right, I just wanted that clarified. Thanks a bunch for that. Peacecraft, can you hear me okay?
What's going on, boss man?
How you doing? Go ahead with your question to whichever debater. So, please try to be very concise. We have a bunch of callers behind you.
Gosh, I gotta nail down some points, but I'll do my best. Vaush, you claim that Jordan Peterson is a fascist due to his rhetoric involving neo-Marxism or his critique of cultural Bolshevism, right? I know you've been on record saying you don't read a lot of theory, so I won't go over the Bolshevists. But if you critique, but you yourself share these same critiques, if you are against the labor theory of value, and you are also stand against communism, you stand alongside not only Jordan Peterson, but also Noam Chomsky in their critique of the Frankfurt School and neo-Marxism. As far as your positive claims about Jordan Peterson.
Just one thing at a time.
Sorry,
I'm trying to respond to one thing at a time. Go ahead.
My apologies.
I don't mind specific critiques of the Frankfurt School. Their job, or I guess their goal, was to be incisive and controversial. So a lot of the stuff they said I think was pretty goddamn stupid. The issue, though, is using them as kind of a scapegoat for the idea that they're using liberal progressivism / degeneracy to sow hatred and discord in the West and so on and so forth. I don't have an issue with the critique itself, like the fundamental idea of critique, at least. It's the way in which it's framed, All
right. In order to make your positive claims of Peterson being a fascist, given that his work for several decades was to examine why individuals and groups alike participate in social conflict, exploring the reasoning and motivation individuals take to support their belief systems that eventually result in killing and pathological atrocities such as the Gulag, the Auschwitz concentration camp, and the Rwandan genocide. Why do you believe that he would stand for such violence when all of his academic work, all of his published work, and all of his other things, at least on the violence claim, violence being a very necessary precondition for fascism, he stands completely opposed? Why would you believe Peterson to be a fascist if a fascist would say all within the state, nothing outside the state? And given Peterson's very public statements critiquing the shit out of his own government, where he tells them to go themselves, and his rise to prominence in his opposition to Bill C-16, why do you believe that he would either be pro-violence or pro-state in the totality that a state would need to be in order to be fascistic?
But remember why he was criticizing the state, of course. It was because they were trying to clamp down on him being transphobic. I think that Jordan Peterson is probably very sincerely anti-state, but I still think that the messaging and rhetoric that he uses directly enables all of the ideological and cultural tendencies of fascism. That is to say, the xenophobia, the natalism, the fear of degeneracy, the so on and so on. I think that he's quite all right.
I have the 14 points.
Let him finish, caller. Let him finish his point. Go ahead.
I just want to say I don't think that Jordan Peterson would ever sit down and say, like, this is why building a death camp is a good idea. That he would be sympathetic to Putin's invasion of Ukraine, apparently for the idea of preventing the spread of Western degeneracy, is a kind of weird indication that he might be more permissive in that regard than he usually lets on. That's a pretty loud warning alarm, right?
All right, I just have a quote for you.
Mm-hmm.
I hope that a revolution of the worker may be possible. We must utilize dual power. By no means should a worker be deprived of his arms, for it is only the constable that is armored with his helmet and his truncheon. The vote of the proletarian cannot accomplish this, for democracy is a tool of the bourgeois. We know not what will come after the revolution, yet the state of life is so untenable for the common worker that we must push ahead regardless. Do you agree with this statement?
No, I don't think so. I think...
Well, that is crazy, Vaush, because that is a direct quote from you, churched up from period language, with your conversation with White Nervosa in 2019, and Short Fat Otako's video timestamped at 33 minutes and 50 seconds.
Yeah, my thinking has evolved since then, I think. I'm a lot more permissive towards electoralism because I think I was overly optimistic on the potential value of direct action as a singular plan for motivating socialist action. Not to mention the fact that, conditions have worsened so much since 2019 that I feel like we need to reshuffle our priorities when it comes to how we'd actually reach out to people and on what issues. Oh, there he goes.
No, I'm sorry. I had to move the call on. It's not me being rude to callers. I just want to try to make sure to get to callers. You can finish your answer. He's listening.
Oh, only that only that, yes, my thinking has absolutely changed in that respect. I don't fully disagree with it. I just think, I don't know. I think things are a bit more complicated now.
Thank you so much for that call in, Peacecraft. Appreciate it very much. Corinth, you're on. Go ahead with your question.
So for PF Jung, I do feel like that the Ku Klux Klan comparison is still incredibly apt, even if you don't try and make it the ideological descendants of it. Especially, at least for the second Ku Klux Klan after Birth of a Nation, which you can see as membership rises in that wave, you still have much less burning down of Black people's houses. The second wave was a lot less direct action, violent oriented. We all agree on that, right?
No, I don't agree that the modern day conservative to KKK member is an apt comparison.
Or I mean, just as the second wave was a lot less direct violent, we agree on, right?
I don't know what you're referring to specifically.
The second wave of the Ku Klux Klan after Birth of a Nation, they weren't burning down Black people's houses. They weren't engaging in lynchings at the rate that the first Ku Klux Klan was. There was still obviously a small subsect of it, but considering they had something 10 to 100 times the membership, it was still a lower net number.
Okay, sure.
So as we said, we can look at what the Ku Klux Klan was advocating for. It was things like anti-globalism. They were against the League of Nations at the time. They were against immigration. They were very like populist and nationalistic, but like ethno.
Do you understand my critique of why I don't think it's wise to compare modern day conservatives to KKK members?
My understanding of that was you were looking at the direct violence caused, and you were saying that modern day conservatives aren't like burning down Black people's houses
No.
with kids in it.
My critique was virtually every person, when they hear the word KKK, thinks of the KKK that burned down houses and lynched Black people. And so when you compare modern conservatives to people that lynched Black people, that seems like a bad idea for the reasons I explained. Do you understand why I hold that position?
I understand why you hold that position. I just don't think that. I think that's a misunderstanding of what the KKK was.
Last bit,
Be the
Corinth.
case.
Make your point very concise.
The KKK didn't all engage in this. You just had a bunch of people that were fine and permissible of this. You have groups of the right, like the Proud Boys and things, where they were trying to go in and van with masks to a gay pride parade. You see things like this where people are running cover for people taking action of this, and that's what the KKK majoritively was after Birth of a Nation and around the turn of the century.
Sure. Well, if you call someone a conservative, a KKK member, and then give them the explanation you just gave, you tell me if that convinces them.
Okay. Corinth, I will let you kind of give a follow up because I'm not sure we can really end it right there on that note.
So whether or not someone like agree to them being a KKK equivalent would be irrelevant if they are, right? Like, people don't like to see themselves as evil, even if we would all agree that they objectively are. Like, you can kill people and think that you're justified for it, even if everyone else will agree that it was an unjust killing.
Okay. Do you think most conservative Americans are killing people? I mean, what is this?
No, I think
don't
most of
understand
them are
what-
running cover for it, like the majority of the KKK members.
I'm sure you believe that.
In the second wave. Do you think that most of the right-wing people are going to be so far against it that they're still going to opt out of sects that are doing this?
Do you have conservative friends, just out of curiosity?
Arguably.
Okay. Do you think the people that you're friends with, would lynch a Black person?
No, I think they'd run cover for people that do, though.
And you're friends with them?
Yes.
Okay. Well, that says more about you than anyone else.
All right, we'll let that. We'll move on to the next one. Noah, you were patiently trying to get into the debate even before it was time for people to get into the debate. So you've been waiting patiently. Do you have a question for somebody?
Yeah. Can you guys hear me?
We can.
Yeah, this is a question for Vaush. So I don't want to straw man you here, but your reason for equivocating Jordan Peterson with the fascist is because he has similar views. Is that correct?
I think he makes a lot of the same arguments, and I think he broadly advocates for a lot of the same cultural tendencies, yes.
Okay, so with that logic, do you think it would be fair to compare, for example, modern day LGBT advocates with people from the past, such as Alfred Kinsley and John Money, who advocated for a lot of the same things?
In what respects?
Well, they had, for example, Alfred Kinsley's book about male sexuality was very influential in shaping the sexual revolution and acceptance of homosexuality and similar behaviors at large in society. And a lot of his associations were with people that, such as abuse kids and stuff, right?
Sure, the standards for psychiatric practice weren't exactly high back then, but there's a difference between trying to describe why you think a person adheres to an ideology and making a tenuous link between a modern-day social movement and like an earlier iteration. If you go back far enough, you'll find that pretty much any modern social movement has an origin point that's pretty disagreeable to us now. I mean, go back to the civil rights movement, or go even further back to the abolitionists or the first wave suffragettes, and you'll probably find that a lot of them had terrible views on a bunch of stuff, and a lot of their leaders probably weren't that great either. But of course, that doesn't denigrate the modern movement. It just means that history has moved forward.
But couldn't you say the exact same thing about Jordan Peterson and what he believes and a lot of conservatives? Couldn't you literally make the same argument?
No, because what they are doing and what they believe now are harmful now. I'm not trying to say that they're bad because they're tied to some earlier iteration of belief that, like cheapens them now by proxy. I think they're bad on their own terms. The term fascist is just a reference to the broad set of tendencies, but specifically, if you look into it, there are criticisms you could justify of their own volition. With modern day LGBT activism, though, obviously all those people are perfect and flawless, so no such work there.
But they're the descent. So your argument is that they're the descendants of people like the KKK and the Nazis, right?
If there's an ideological through line, yes, the KKK to modern conservatism. Is there an ideological through line to the people you mentioned, and the modern queer movement? Yes, of course there is. But I don't think that in and of itself is a denunciation. You would have to examine what has moved, what has grown, what has changed, and how it refers and applies to the systems we live in today,
Yeah, I mean, the main issue I have with what you're saying is it seems like it's like a double standard. Like, do you think that that same sort of charity that you're giving to this movement that you support, you're giving it to the people that you don't support, such as Jordan Peterson? Don't you think literally the exact same thing verbatim that you said could be said about them as well?
No, because I can criticize Jordan Peterson on his own merits. If the criticism you wanted to make was that, hey, you compare modern conservatives to the KKK because of an ideological through line, couldn't you do the same between like modern queer movement people and like the 1960s psych people, the weirdos or whatever, which is true. That is true. But unless specific criticisms can be found of the modern queer movement, there's not really any value to denunciation by proxy. You'd have to argue, well, this is a bad thing they did then, and here it is present today, and here's how it's changed over time.
No, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. No, I'm sorry. I got the call there. I appreciate the call in, though. Have yourself a great day.
We love you, Noah.
Andrew,
almost.
My friend says you're an addict in its fullest meaning, referring to cigarettes, I believe, and he wishes that you quit for your own sake because we love you.
I think it makes him look cool.
Now I got to remove you from the stream. What the? Every time the smoking, right?
I agree with Vaush.
I'm a smoker, all right? I get it. I understand, right? It's a moral failing of mine. I'm so sorry, all right?
I think it makes you look cool. You don't need to apologize for that.
That's
right.
Worst thing about cigarettes is they do look pretty cool. Not gonna lie.
They do look cool. Joe Camel had it right. All right, Will, you've been waiting very patiently. Go ahead with your call in and whoever you had a question for, please.
Hey, so this is a question for Paul. So I sort of want to ask you about like why Jordan Peterson has like this really like deep disdain for trans men, right? So like you have Elliot Page, right? I mean, he basically did it like quote unquote perfectly. He transitioned as an adult, right? He also like didn't make that much of a fuss about it because he did like, I don't know, 5 years or so before all this trans shit going on nowadays. So like, but like, yet on the other hand, right, he's like really gentle and like fatherly towards like these alienated men, which seems to fit trans men to a T, right? Like that advice is genuinely useful for trans men. So I was just like wondering, like, why does he hate like trans men so much instead of like, I don't know, trying to like, I don't know, be nice to them or like guide them or do anything other than like call them degenerate or something, right?
Okay, well, again, everything you just said is not true. I don't think there's every piece of advice or piece of psychological advice that Jordan Peterson puts forward is applicable to everyone.
No,
so there's nothing in his body of work that's independent or that is exclusive of trans people. He's again, you notice you took Elliot Page as one example and then compared it to all men. Why does Jordan Peterson like all men but dislike one person? Well, his dislike for what Elliot Page did was that Elliot Page, in his mind, and again, I disagree with this, but I understand why Jordan Peterson would hold this perspective, is that Elliot Page, I think Peterson's term was flaunting their surgery, that could very likely convince many children to go along with it or to do that themselves. And if you believe, as we have to iron out, this is an open challenge to anyone who would like to debate this. We can do it on the Crucible. We can exchange studies. If it is the case, there is a social epidemic of children transitioning who will regret it. then Elliot Page, from a consequentialist perspective, played a role in encouraging people who might not otherwise be trans to undergo surgery. If you believe that gender is a social construct, meaning that meaning that the roles of gender, of man and woman and all that are determined by media in part and social norms, then how is it not the case that someone proclaiming how they, became transgender and it was perfect for them, and that might be the case, but when it's when you're a star and you have a bunch of children who are in the midst of a what I again believe, and I think the evidence clearly indicates, an epidemic, it's a problem. It's like, it's like someone who lost a ton of weight to the point that they were anorexic and then saying this is good for children. Because if Elliot Page came out and said, I did this, but children should wait, and if you're a child and you're thinking about doing this, wait till you're 18 so you know this is the right move, I guarantee you Peterson would have had a different perspective. Is that unreasonable? Do you think should Elliot Page have probably done that?
No, I'm saying like he says this not just towards Elliot Page, right? If that's not true, you can I guess I'll take the L on that. But he said that towards all trans men as well, even those who are privately
That's not true.
their,
Nope, that's wrong. That's not
how
true.
he says specifically.
Give me an example, otherwise it's not true.
I mean, he says I'm pretty sure he's just in general, right? Trans people are just
nope.
They're misguided or
Caller. I'm not sure that we're getting anywhere here with this call. I don't want to cut your time short, but can you make a really concise point here that PF can respond to?
I'm just saying, why this hostility? To instead of trying to work, instead of does he have this negative attitude instead of a more positive attitude, like he does with problematic men?
Sure. Let me try and put this in a way that people generally would agree. Religious people on the right who send their children to gay conversion therapy rightfully elicit indignation and rage from people, and that should. And so when those people who see religious conservatives sending children to gay conservative camp, it makes sense why they would then broadly say, actually, religion in general kind of sucks. If I can understand why someone would have that perspective, why can the other side not understand why, if some minority of children, a very small minority, but a large enough that it is part of a bigger issue, if some of those children do get their breasts surgically removed at age 13, which they do, and no one disputes that it's happened, and that the studies say it was a successful surgery despite them being bullshit studies, which again, I will back up and debate anytime, then again, it makes sense why someone would have skepticism of look, we're going a little bit too fast on this, saying anyone can be anything at any time. We should maybe pump the brakes a little bit and understand the extreme elements of either side are a problem. And we need to have some sort of reasonable middle agreement, but nobody seems to want.
Thank you for that. Appreciate that, Paul. I got to move on to the next caller. Elrunder, did you have a question? Go ahead.
Yes, I was calling in because I heard Paul theorizing about Jordan Peterson maybe trying to subvert the Christian uprising or de-radicalizing Christians or something.
Mm-hmm.
And then the whole thing, who's the real fascist and so on. And
Mm-hmm.
my question comes down to this, because we have a clear evidence for this thing, and I want to hear Vaush's opinion on that as well. Jordan Peterson clearly stated many times on many occasions that his primary goal was not to defeat the leftists or something. He was seeing an uprising, especially in America and Europe, in America of the alt-right, who were the only force to take on the culture war against the left. And he saw that as a danger because he's an individualist. He hates identity politics, and therefore he had to take basically, it's basically like a neoliberal renaissance he had to instate, and he was very successful with that. So that was his primary goal. I want to state that. And if you have watched Vaush, have you watched that documentary of Resurrection Europa, Jordan Peterson Dismantled? Do you have an opinion on that?
Are you German?
Yes.
Okay. Well, my ancestors are mostly Polish, which is why it's going to be quite an embarrassment to you that I'm about to out IQ you right here, okay? You and your alt-right compatriots are terrible at
I'm not alt-right. I'm an identitarian.
Right, yeah, okay, thank you. Are terrible at knowing what's
don't
good.
deflect from my question.
Let him finish his answer.
Yeah, come on. Are terrible at
finish
knowing
his
what's
answer.
good for you, okay? The modern Republican Party is clearly gunning to achieve basically everything you cared about. They're just not stupid enough to openly announce it. Do you think Hitler would have been able to one day rise to the position of prominence he had if he was back in 29 screaming about the Jewish question? No, of course not. It's basic political strategy operated in by every radical group in the world, okay? So you're complaining about Jordan Peterson. Oh, he's an individualist. He's diffusing the culture war critic, blah, blah. Shut up, man. Have you listened to what he's been saying lately? Degeneracy racking the entirety of the right?
I've seen what he's saying. He's now complaining about the evil Nazi trolls saying laughing my ass off on Twitter. So what are you talking about? It's pure speculation on your
obviously,
part.
as long as you
because
call
you
yourself...
need to be a dissident,
caller.
You're not a dissident.
As long as you
calm down.
You're obsessed with the aesthetic of being a dissident because you need something to explain your virginity, okay? As long as you call yourself a Nazi, obviously you're going to be denounced. Jesus, the Republicans don't mind Nazis. They've been working with you from behind the scenes for literal decades. The only time they denounce you is when you're stupid enough to say you're a Nazi or an identitarian or whatever. Jordan Peterson is doing good work for you, okay? Right now, your side, your guys, billions of dollars in dark money being funded to people, even like Ben Shapiro, even Ben, because Ben shares a network with Matt Walsh and Candace Owens, literal Hitler defending Candace Owens, and Matt Walsh, who was talking about how necessary it is to employ the death penalty to rid our streets of degenerates. You have no idea how good things are for you. You millennials, you goddamn millennials.
Can I say?
No,
going back to
Paul, this is the caller's time. Go ahead.
Oh.
I just want El Ronder to appreciate how good things are for them right now. That's it. That's like, I'm a socialist, man. Think about how I feel, okay? Steven Crowder was crying and moaning about not getting a $50 million contract so he can make jokes about black people and put on minstrel shows. And I, meanwhile, have to worry about YouTube TOS monetization. Do you think there are dark billionaires funding BreadTube? Where do you think our money is coming from? Even
Dude,
Nick Fuentes, who's stupid enough to
control all the institutions.
I
but
wish.
Funny from a
I
German
wish.
I tell you that.
Show me what institutions.
We are really laughing about the establishment, basically tolerated establishment, political forefront like Steven Crowder, making millions.
You have no
Here
idea.
In Germany, we have no money whatsoever, and these people make on a YouTube channel like 50 million.
No
or
shit,
something.
because you guys f***ed up in Germany. You f***ed up there. You don't eat where you shit, dumbass. Nazis already had a try over there.
Everywhere. It's only America who has the funding. Conservatives in America.
I'm so sorry. It's only the backing of the most powerful and wealthy country in the world. I know how devastating that must be for your failed ideology. Jesus Christ. Look, you have no idea how good things are for you right now. You lack the political comprehension necessary to understand your ideology cannot be brought about by a bunch of LARPing 17-year-olds screaming about how they're the real renegades running online and talking about Jews, okay? It has always been about the dog whistle. It has always been about the covert...
the Jews. You're making stuff up, Vaush.
I'm sorry. Hold on. Wait, really quickly. You said people like me control all the institutions. What do you mean by that?
Yes, people with your ideology, progressive
socialists?
values. Yes, also socialists. Yes, many socialists.
Okay, just to let you know, you might want to change ideologies because the Nazis did kill the mentally disabled, and if you seriously think socialists control institutions in this country, you might want to skedaddle to Spain or some shit before they went. Okay, goodbye him.
No, you can finish.
No,
He's still
these
listening.
millennials, these Nazis today, they have no idea how good they have it. I swear to God. Even back when I started my channel, all right? Even back then, Donald Trump seemed to put some kind of effort in distinguishing himself for the farthest right of the Christian nationalists. But no. Now everything is going their ways. Ron DeSantis is literally like, yeah, what if we just did the Fourth Reich here in Florida? And they're like, but I still can't call the Jews out of Twitter. God almighty, they are so whiny. But he'll grow up. He's like 15. They all are.
If I could just chime in.
And Elronder, I do appreciate the call. I don't try to remove you guys. I'm not trying to throw you off. I'm just trying to consolidate the time frame correctly. So I'm fine. I'm fine with people challenging both debaters' ideology. I have no problem with that whatsoever. Paul, did you have something you needed to say?
Yeah. First off, ich bin outentwickelt seitens ich sprechen die Wurst konfianz ist.
You speak German?
I agree.
It's
Whatever
it's
he said.
It's absolute gibberish. But
Oh.
That was pretty good gibberish.
Yeah, it was really good gibberish. It was convincing gibberish for
Dankeschön.
sure.
Was
that gibberish too?
No, that was thank you.
Okay.
The point, first off, I don't know what that person was exactly saying, but he did seem right-wing, certainly far right-wing. Although I didn't really hear, like I said. However, Vaush, to the point, you made a point about Matt Walsh talking about like death penalty and shit.
Mm-hmm.
I have made a video specifically saying Matt Walsh is approaching fascistic. Those are fascist talking points, real fascist talking points, proto-fascist even. The point about syndrome, right? As soon as Matt Walsh says those people are evil and we need to do something, you can't get along with evil. That is the opposite of Jordan Peterson's entire body of work, which is that we are all capable of evil.
Wait,
the whole message.
What's that called again? Redundancy? Is that
syndrome?
Yeah, redundancy.
When you use a word to mean anything, it means nothing. When everyone's super, no one will be. When everyone's fascist, no one is. And my point is, you make it more difficult for us centrists, the real people, to call out the actual far right people.
Here's
like
the issue.
Matt Walsh, who's approaching that.
Ron DeSantis is threatening felonies against teachers who have books in their classrooms containing references to gender or sexuality for the exact same reason that you defend Jordan Peterson going off an Elliot Page. This is why I use the term more than you do. What you're looking at in DeSantis is a policy application of something you're defending. The idea that the public demonstration of this ideology is something that could lead to children getting groomed. The idea that these first graders in their classroom might open up a book and see like some gender sex ideology thing and that might trans them. That is the same fear as Jordan Peterson saying they might see Elliot Page posting happy selfies. So all you're really railing against here is the policy application of your ideology. But that's the difference. I believe we need to call it out at the ideological level, not just wait for it to become policy. You have to target these things when they're still festering in the minds, incomplete thoughts. You can't just wait for them to be in charge. Like, Ron DeSantis has already got a decent shot at winning the presidency. Like, okay, now we find out that he's a fascist. Well, I was telling people that years ago, and I could have said that a long time ago.
When you call everyone a fascist, you usually get 100%
no, it's the same
rate when they
thing.
actually
It's the
turn out to
same-
be fascist.
It's the same
I
ideology.
don't believe anything you said about Ron DeSantis. I know that he passed a law to ban critical race theory, which Jordan Peterson disagrees with, and so do I. I do not. What you said, he's threatening felony charges for people who have books that reference gender and sexuality. That's not possible because any mention of man or woman is referencing.
That
gender.
is
So
literally
your description.
Wait. Look at what's happening. You can Google it. It's happening right now. Florida is providing it. I can't help you with that. I can't help you with that. You have to Google. There's a Florida whitelist of books that they're going to approve. Obviously, even though they say they're disallowing any references to gender or sexuality, what they actually mean is any references to non-cis, non-straight people, because that's always what they mean with
just to be clear.
Language.
What I said, I don't believe what you just characterized. You're saying the law as written is that any book that references, quote, gender and sexuality, end quote, you're saying anyone who has a book that does that, whatever the that means, those teachers are going to prison.
The law says public
Please
school
read it.
teachers may not instruct on sexual orientation or gender identity, but instruct was, well, wait, hold on. So instruct is really vague, and it's including now per broad like interpretation and through like state interpretation, having books in your classroom that indicate those things. So instruct on actually means your classroom contains it all. And the word is sexual orientation or gender identity, which, yes, the technical definition of the law, the actual text on the bill would mean that, yes, any reference to being a man or a woman, even if you were cisgender, would be illegal. But that's not how it's being enforced. Much in the same way that Nazi Germany would talk.
What age was that law applied to?
That's from 2022.
I'm saying, what age is sexual orientation not allowed to be introduced in the classroom? Because just to be clear, in case this is a fascistic talking point, I don't think it's unreasonable to say before the age of, like, let's say 5th grade or something, we don't need to bring up sexual orientation in general. You can acknowledge, like, oh, so-and-so has 2 moms, which you should, because there are people who have 2 moms.
So to be clear, you would be in favor of the state bringing felony charges against a teacher if they have a book in their classroom, and that book is the story of like a little girl realizing that she's actually like into girls and not boys. Like her mom's like, one day you're going to get a boyfriend. And her dad's like, one day you're going to get a boyfriend. And then at the end of the 6-page book, she's like, actually, I think I like girls. And the mom and dad are like, I guess that's okay too. So how many years in prison for that one? 6, 7? That's what's happening right now.
Yes,
so
you are deliberately just doing a bit and removing all the
No. That is explicitly the thing that is happening.
And that's, like Jordan Peterson said, wrong. He's against all of DeSantis's bans on critical race theory, and I'm sure the gender stuff as well, because that's just as vague.
Has he said that? Has he said that he disapproves?
He's explicitly said the attempts to ban critical race theory is a bad idea, and it leads to censorship.
Okay, so if he thinks that it's morally wrong for a trans male adult celebrity to post selfies because that might influence children on gender ideology, how is that not the exact same thing?
If we are in the midst of a social contagion, which you disagree with.
Okay, that's what Ron DeSantis is trying to prevent. You realize that, right? They're referencing the social contagion in the Florida Don't Say Gay bill. And what you're talking about is degeneracy, by the way. When you say social contagion, it is explicitly...
No, it's not.
Also, Jordan B. Peterson agreed with Trump when he said he wants to ban all ages, federal gender ideology, and affirming care. So apparently...
No, he didn't.
So apparently...
Pull it up. Let's see it. That's what you just said is wrong.
Okay. He agreed with the speech that Donald Trump gave out back on the 1st of February. Trump said that he wanted... Trump said... So here's the tweet from Michael Knowles, which is describing a video linked within. Trump is calling to outlaw transgender ideology, not just for little kids, not just in classrooms or certain federal programs, at every level. This is an excellent development, and other potential 2024 candidates should follow suit. Jordan Peterson quote tweets with, I'd have to agree. So that seems as straightforward as possible. That is an explicit endorsement of federally banning anything.
Do we have time to pull up the tweet and the speech?
I can link it. The tweet.
No, we don't. We've ended up in a side debate. I've got to get to our last call, and then I got to get to
let me say this.
All right, hang on, Paul. Listen to what I'm saying. Very important. We won't be able to get to all the super chats within the confines of the time limit that we have here, guys, if we go on too much of a side tangent. So I'm gonna allow a little bit of it, but just understand I'm trying to keep this on pace.
Sure.
So that we're not here all night, right?
I'll just wrap this up and say I'll watch that tweet, and I will that speech, and I will, if he says what you said, if Jordan Peterson agreed that all transition should be illegal, if that's what Trump put forward, and then Jordan Peterson said I'd have to agree, then I will make a video condemning that, because that's bullshit, and that is one example of Jordan Peterson being a dumbass, which he is certainly capable of being.
Outlawing the ideology at every level, which would be like...
Outlawing the ideology or the ability for adults to get gender surgery?
The ideology, which again, I know you hate these comparisons. Outlawing the ideology of social contagion and degeneracy was the literal first thing the Nazis started their book burnings over. The literal, actual, direct first thing they did was... we will no longer allow the education of or learning of this material. We will mass ban all these books.
Yes, censorship is bad.
Okay, I agree. Okay, let's just move on. Yeah.
All right, guys, we got to get to our last caller here before we get to super chats. I don't see anybody else in the queue. And Rob Norrie, you've been
Holy
waiting
shit.
patiently. Go ahead with your questions.
Yeah, can you hear me? Thanks so much for having
Yeah. Well, there's
Uh,
no, and by the way, there's no ambush. I just let
Oh, no,
people
it's
who
totally
call
fine.
in, talk. So go ahead, Rob.
Yeah, thanks for having me, everyone. I didn't hear all of the debate, so I had a question for Vaush. You're not claiming that Jordan Peterson's like called for the shooting or the execution of anyone in the trans community or anything like that, right? You're just saying that his rhetoric could lead to bad policy and bad actors doing terrible things and violence.
I mean, he's agreeing with a prospective presidential candidate saying that they want to ban the ideology at every level and ban all medical intervention for it. So that seems like the literal first thing you do before shooting an ethnic group. Like nationally ban teaching about them and arrest people who do teach about them, and then like exclude them from the healthcare system, and then
Okay.
like you would shoot them.
Fair enough. I've watched you on a debate make comparisons to conservatives over and over to Nazis, as you're sort of doing here. And in that debate, I believe it was with a left winger, you continually said, shouldn't we have stopped the Nazis in the 30s before they took power? You then went on to make a statement that I want to ask if you still agree with. You said that you want a world where left wingers could shoot out windows at the Patriot Prayer type people in Portland, where, by the way, a Patriot Prayer member was executed in that very situation. He was open carrying. That group was open carrying lawfully, and you said you would like to see them shot. How can you criticize someone for taking a step that might lead to violence when you yourself are directly calling for it?
First of all, obviously not all violence is equivalent. You'd have to morally assess it. But second of all, you're mischaracterizing my position. I didn't say that people should have been shooting at the Patriot Prayer Boys. I was saying that if ever we reached a hypothetical scenario where right-wing militias were invading cities, shooting and killing people in some kind of social clap situation, society falls apart, all the right-wingers in the hills of Washington and Oregon run out at the cities with their AR-15s and such. Under those situations, obviously, shooting at them would just be a matter of simple self-defense. That's a pretty easy ethical one. The reason I was talking about it there was I was defending the right to gun ownership. I was saying that if that social situation ever does happen, then I would rather not die to the right-wing militia. I'd rather be able to defend myself.
I didn't hear you say that. You didn't say, and if you're clarifying those remarks, that's fine. But in the context of that conversation, you didn't say, you referenced the specific action the Patriot Prayer was taking. You said they were menacing people, they were harassing people because they were intimidating people with guns, and you wanted a world where they would be getting shot out. But I accept if you're changing your position. But the point I have is, don't you think it's incumbent on you to be more responsible for your action, seeing as how the issue that you referenced specifically did lead to the murder of someone by someone who is very similar in ideology to you?
I feel I was consistent and clear with my point before, but I don't remember every word I've ever said. Either way, I'm generally consistent on this point. I do believe in exercising the right to self-defense, and I don't believe it's irresponsible to exercise the right to self-defense either. I think we kind of have to, given the situation, right?
Hang on, Rob. I just want to let you know this is going to be your last point. You got to make it very concise.
Okay, I just want to say that, I think that when you hear talk of censorship, talk of legitimate self-defense, the caller previously was right that all these institutions are dominated by people that share an ideology with Vaush. They might not be as socialist as Vaush, but Vaush isn't a socialist either. He's a millionaire, that moonlights as a socialist so he could keep getting money. That's what these leftists do. So, Vaush, I would love to debate you someday on this. But I know you keep running from me and pretending you don't know me. So anytime you want to debate, you talk to Andrew or me. We'll set up a debate on the topic of your choosing. But it was an interesting debate. Thanks for letting me call in.
Yeah, of course, Rob. Have a great day. Appreciate your call in.
I have no defeaters for these arguments.
Appreciate the call in. We have a lot of people across the board who do call in. I know that there's been maybe a bit of a kerfuffle between these two, but I don't care. If somebody wants to call and they have legitimate questions.
No, I like Rob.
We're going to fill them. So, guys, we're going to move over to the super chats. I understand that there may be a bit more contention here as we go through them. I'm going to
There's
kind
no
of
contention here. I don't know what you're talking about.
Right. There's none. It's not even a debate, really, when you think about it. Risky Dave sends in a $5 super chat. He says, absolutely nothing. By the way, my favorite kind of super chat. Borp sends in $2 and says, Vaush, what you're some of these are trolls, troll chats. I'm going to skip. Borb sends in a $2
Please
super
do.
chat and says, "Clean your room, bucko." Godzilla sends in a $3.72 super chat and says, "Normally my disdain of Vaush makes me super chat to tell him so." Well, that'll teach him. But not this time, Vaush. Not this time.
Not this
Which,
time.
by the way, I appreciate the super chat. It's kind of, goes against your own narrative there, but okay. Adult Small Bear sends in a $2 super chat and says, "Oh God, some of them are trolls."
How many of them involve horses?
No horses yet.
No
Not
horse. Aw.
yet. Not yet. Now all of them are going to be about horse. You did that to yourself.
Yeah, it's very funny. I don't mind.
2.2 acres and a bear sends in $5 and says PF is Zach Morris's younger brother. You do have the Zach Morris haircut.
I don't know who Zach Morris is.
You've never seen Saved by the Bell, dude?
I've seen the remake, but no,
Hang
not
on,
the
hang on.
original.
Vaush, you've seen Saved by the Bell, haven't you?
God, when I was really young, my dad was
Yeah.
watching it.
Yeah.
Well, Vaush is considerably older than me, so that would make sense.
Wait, how old are you?
I'm centrist James Vanderbeek, is what I've been told.
That's your age?
If you had to guess, how old do you think I am, Vaush?
Well, shit, now that you've said that, I don't know, 23?
Like, I don't know. I would have guessed more like 30.
You look, I feel like you look how old I am, but I might look older than I am, so you might not know that. How old are you?
I'm 26.
26. Okay. I'm 28. All right. We're not. All right. Okay.
Like I said,
Still alive.
considerably older.
Yeah, still alive. Whew.
Right.
So 2.2 acres and a bear sends in a $5 super chat and says, "Vaush versus BPF on a trans debate battle royale 2023." All right. Well, I appreciate the super chat. Pestilent Fellow sends in a $10 super chat and says, "Can we get a Vaush versus BPF debate on the trans movement?" Okay, fuck.
Oh,
I hear you guys. We'll talk
happening.
about it. Whatever. Vegan Jealousism says Andrew versus. Oh man, enough of that. Same from the same character says for $4, Vaush is dancing around making actual points, and then follows up with Vaush is too woke, guys, and that's coming from a vegan.
I learned it from Jordan Peterson.
Fair enough. Raymond Cannon sent in a $4 super chat, says absolutely nothing. Reverend Coffin's son sends in $10 and says, "Vaush is the biggest R slur in the debate brosphere, hands down." So
That's
I
true.
see that you've made a fan. Got a big fan there.
Hey, they must like me enough to at least know that I'm the biggest one.
Right. What's that?
It's like the Jack Sparrow thing, but you have heard
Yeah,
it.
exactly.
But you have heard of me. Yeah, fair enough. Vile Van Gogh sends in a whopping $20 super chat. Appreciate that. And says, "Progressive crime policies have resulted in record homicide rates disproportionately represented by Black deaths. Martin Luther King could be forgiven if he was resurrected today and made the guess that BLM was the next iteration of the KKK." So
What?
I think his point here is that Black deaths and homicide are disproportionately represented, and that Martin Luther King, if he was resurrected today, might be in the camp of you considering him a fascist or a Nazi.
I probably wouldn't agree with him on everything. Also, he was a dirty social democrat. As for like modern day crime stat, I have no idea what that has to do with progressive policing policy. Policing for the past 30 years has been defined by broken windows policing, which has been considered in retrospect not only to be destructive, expensive, but also like the right-wing take. I mean, we have more prisoners than any country on earth. How could we possibly have a progressive system for policing?
That's just a funny comment for no particularly good reason. I just thought it was funny. Mr. Spencer sends in a $2 super chat and says, "Paul, what's your definition of fascism?"
What's my definition? Yeah. I'm not sure that I have one. I usually don't define most of the words that I use, like most people. As in, most people do not define the words that they use. I'm using it in sort of fascism is a ideology that centers around a totalitarian state, a top-down order, a suppression of the rights of democracy, the suppression of individualism, the state justifying or the state mandating that some people have more rights than others. I mean, that's a stab at it. Does that seem unreasonable?
Well,
Me?
I
Big
think
Papa
there's a
fascist
lot of-
or Vaush.
I think that there's a lot of definitions that can
Well,
be
certainly we've
used.
seen that on this debate. Yes.
That can be used for fascism, and I think that it's an ideology that's not very well understood, even by people who claim that they are. So,
Sure. And I would just point out more broadly when people ask, like, well, define this word or define this word. It's like, well, if you actually break it down, most people do not define most of the words they use. And it's not really an issue, right? Fascism, okay, that's a good example. But like, for example, we use words like experience. Define the word experience. It's like, well, I've never actually sat down and defined the word experience. I just
and
assume
define
other
it by
people-
using Final Fantasy references.
Well, that would work. So,
Okay.
fascists are bad people. That's the simplest definition.
Vigangelicism for $8 says people are not gender interchangeable widgets. Based Andrew Wilson. Okay, thank you for that.
What does that even mean?
That people aren't interchangeable widgets.
I guess. Yeah, I think we're all unique snowflakes in our own way. We all have something to bring to the table.
Yeah, I would. Well, I mean, I actually agree with that. Mr. Spencer sent in a $2 super chat and said, "No, really, Paul. No, really, Paul. What is fascism?" So it's almost like he
Well,
knew
it's
for sure that you were
really-
going to define this incorrectly, because this super chat's from an hour ago. So this
that's
one
impressive.
predicted
Wow.
that the previous one's question was going to go unanswered.
You know what? He should donate again and just say gotcha, and he should do it $20 or $30 or $50.
I mean, he should, but he kind of got you, right? Just
Hey,
like a little bit. Got you a little bit there.
I'm a fool, so I have no problem getting got in the metaphorical sense, of course.
Vegan Gel sends in another $3.72. Says, Vaush, how could you compare people to Nazis no nonchalantly? It's pretty weird, dude.
Yeah, I agree. The times that we live in are pretty weird. Unfortunately, what you're suffering from and what I might diagnose you for is kind of like a temporal exceptionalism. Nazis weren't exceptional. There were plenty of Nazi supporters all around the world back when they were prominent. The idea that the Nazis represent some kind of like incredibly unique cosmic event that can't be replicated, can't inform anything, can't influence people or change people's minds in the future, it's just not true. It was a powerful and widely accepted political ideology. There were adherents to it then all around the world, and there are still today. There aren't as many now as there were then, but it's a thing that exists, People got all up in arms because it's like this Godwin's law thing. Oh, well, the Nazis were so bad. Oh, well, you know what? The Nazis weren't the only ones that did a genocide. The British killed millions in the Raj in India. They also killed millions of Irish people with a genocide disguised historically as a famine. And we still call a famine, by the way. The Belgians did in the Congo what the Americans did to the Native Americans. This happens all the time everywhere. The idea that you have to be somehow super unique or special to be compared to the Nazis, I just don't think it's true.
That is exactly the central message of Jordan Peterson's work, if I may point out.
Yes, I'm familiar. I think I might have actually seen a specific piece of material that you're referring to where he talks about the capacity for anyone to become that bad.
Right.
Unfortunately, I don't think he has very much self-awareness. So he may denounce the idea, oh, anyone could be a Nazi, and then he'll turn around and start talking about how we need to ally with Trump to federally ban all references to transgender people. And, okay, well, here we go again.
Okay, let me move over to some other super chats here. Early Life Checks sent in a $10 super chat and said, are we really having a debate about Jordan Peterson, the shill who runs cover for Israel and recently called for war with Iran because my reasons?
This is more like Nazi whining. Listen, okay, one day you're going to lose your virginity, and the obsession with distinguishing yourself from regular modern conservatism is going to fade away. You're going to realize there's more important stuff in your life, and you're going to become more of a relaxed, latent supporter of Nazism, the way most people are, by voting Republican. Okay, right now you're full of anger, you're full of rage. You're gonna. It's not going to be there with you forever, okay? It's going to fall off your shoulders like a weight, and you're going to realize, wow, modern day conservatism's honestly doing the job a hell of a lot better than you and your crazy internet LARPing ever could. Godspeed.
See, I laughed at that. That's funny. And like, because you say you can. What did you say? You can support. You said
Like the way most Americans do
Nazism
by voting
Republican.
Yeah.
Right. That's a funny line. Okay. Which is why I understand the hyperbole and stuff. It's just, I hope you understand the degree to which you, the real person who's aware that was funny, and the persona, and we all have personas. P.F. Jung is an online persona as much as Vaush. You're aware of the danger of blending those too much. Because
it was funny, but it wasn't. I wasn't joking. I mean that. Most Nazi groups endorsed. Wait, seriously, go on Nazi online forums. Who do you think they voted for in 2016? Independent?
All of the communists voted Democrat.
No, a lot of them don't vote, but if you could average out their votes, ignoring the people who didn't, yes, sure.
Right. So each side has its crazies, and each side is responsible for addressing its own
communists are good, unlike Nazis who are bad.
Another bit. See,
that's not a bit. I agree. Wait, yeah, I'm a Marxist. I've got capital right behind me.
Yeah, but Marx. Oh my God! I was under this. Don't you argue with tankies all the time?
Yeah, but I don't think they're communists. I think they're fascists. I laugh, but I'm not joking again.
Well, it's hard to tell.
All right, BioValve sent in a $10 super chat and says, communists support state-owned resources. Fascists also supported state-owned resources. By Vaush's logic, aren't communists fascists?
No.
That was an interesting segue, by the way, from the previous tanky to, so you know.
It really was. The Nazis massively privatized their industries, actually. And in a communist society, there wouldn't be a state. But no, the Nazis did not have a bunch of state-owned industries, far less than the Weimar Republic. They had a bunch of state control, but that's different from state ownership.
Okay. 2.2 acres and a bear sent in a $2 super chat and said, Peterson blows. Secret Stars sent in a $5 super chat and said, can Paul name any present-day American figure who he believes is a fascist? If not, does he believe there are no fascist public figures anywhere in America? That's actually a really good question.
It is. I would say that Matt Walsh recently has uttered fascist rhetoric. Like, these people are evil and we can't get along with them. And the kernel of truth in his point, again, everyone on this panel agrees that child abuse is pretty close to evil, I would assume. What constitutes child abuse? Obviously, there's a dispute. But if you believe, as I do, that there is serious child abuse type stuff that is getting normalized, like the, what was it, the 9-year-olds going to the drag shows where there are fake breasts exposed. It wasn't at a school. It wasn't a drag queen story hour. It was parents on their own volition bringing their children to a show with sex acts. That's up. I think that's perfectly reasonable to call degeneracy. It is wrong and fascistic to say that someone who comes to a school with like a clown outfit that could be perceived as drag, even if they themselves don't call themselves drag, that's terrible. Like any mention of, like you said, if you even mention gay people, then that's a bad thing. That would be legitimate fascism. And so Matt Walsh is pushing a lot of that stuff. And my evaluation of him as a fascist is precisely because he is saying the exact opposite point that Jordan Peterson makes. These people are evil, not me. I'm not capable of evil, even though I'm a rich billionaire or millionaire who has a huge platform. And I'm, telling all these people that these people are evil. I'm not capable of that. These people are. And it's like, again, it's very easy to understand why people are upset about the extreme shit going on.
Yeah, the problem is just keep in mind, leaving aside whatever fantasies you might have about like 15,000 double mastectomies of 13-year-olds happening every day. In reality, it isn't. And what's more, if you were to do like a culture war crusade after any kind of behavior, this would be like one video going viral of a dad sneaking their son into a strip club, something I think you shouldn't do, obviously. And then going, that's it. Hooters is out of here. Strip clubs out of here. What kind of degenerate ideology would, et cetera, et cetera. The issue is like, if you want to hyperfixate on some incredibly tiny minority of perceived bad behavior within a community and use that as an excuse to attack all of them, that is how literally all forms of bigotry take place. Every pogrom against the Jews was incited by some story, real or imagined, it didn't matter, about one Jewish guy doing something bad. Every KKK lynching was done following some story, real or imagined, of some black guy a white girl or being in the wrong place at the wrong time. There's always an initial justifying, legitimizing anecdote that's used.
Sure, that's true with anything in history. Who was the black child that was beaten and thrown into a river, and the mom left his funeral casket open to show everyone what they did to the child? Of course, anecdotes are powerful. Black Lives Matter. George Floyd is exactly what you described. The number of unarmed black men that are killed by the police is less than 30 a year.
Except the changes, except again, because again, your guy is proposing a federal ban on healthcare.
Who's me? Who's my guy?
Jordan Peterson. Your guy is proposing a federal ban on healthcare and literally all education on them. Comparing that to we need police reform because of brutality against black people, it's not really comparable.
Okay.
The reform is good, but what you're talking about is social ostracization. You've unironically called it degenerate. If you want to talk about degeneracy being inappropriate behavior with children, then literally every community on earth is culpable for that. The largest of which being, by the way, parents and religious groups, and I guess
Catholic
uncles.
Church, yeah, that's for sure.
The church, the home, and school, which are, between the three of them, essentially all institutions. And it's not like work doesn't do this either. If you want to run a crusade on like, here are a couple of examples of abuse of children in this environment, therefore, we're going to ban these people, we're going to make it illegal to teach about them, we're going to excise them. You can't do this for everyone. The reason you think trans people in particular are a threat, or the reason you think gender ideology, because that's the whole, love the sinner, hate the sin thing. It's you
right,
get
which
brownie
we already
points.
Proved you were wrong about.
We did not prove anything to that fact because you've done it in this conversation. What you're advocating for is exclusion of a minority group, but you abstract it by talking about an ideology instead. An ideology which is being used right now for unironic fascist like book burning taking place under Ron DeSantis. Jordan Peterson endorses the ideology behind it and federal bans that lead to it.
100% wrong.
Okay.
We already talked about this.
He's
against, he literally said in the last podcast, he's against all of the censorship because it's too ill-defined. Critical race theory, ill-defined. I guarantee you he'd feel the same way
Jordan
about
Peterson was lobotomized by his daughter. His brain is soup. He says lots of shit. In that tweet that I linked,
funny.
In that tweet that I linked, he agrees with an explicit and unambiguous federal ban on this stuff.
I guarantee you that if Ron DeSantis comes out and the legislation says we're banning references to gender, that Peterson will say exactly what he said about critical race theory.
But he just said he agrees with it.
Yeah, he tweeted it. He's, like I said, he's the dumbest person on Twitter, and people retweet stuff that's all that is dumb all the time. Okay. Are you serious? Really? Do you want to go into the worst tweets or worst individual things that people say that don't actually reflect their beliefs?
Well, I think if a person's a public political figure who's a millionaire and is listened to by tens of millions, and they say on Twitter, I agree with these policies, that should probably be taken as an indication they agree with those policies. So it's not just like he's being like mean or something. He said it explicitly.
So why did he say, if he's in favor of that, did he explicitly say that critical race theory shouldn't be banned, that Ron DeSantis is making a mistake, that's censorship and authoritarian? He said that
he's inconsistent and possibly dishonest, like many of the people he works with. Yeah.
Or that's one explanation. Or, like I said, he's the dumbest Twitter user ever. He's a 60-year-old boomer. Of course, you roll your eyes, but you know it's true. So
being Jordan a boomer doesn't mean you just casually agree with fascism online.
He's a dumbass Twitter user. And again, if you can provide me a rationale of any kind, why would Jordan Peterson say it is a mistake for DeSantis to ban critical race theory? That's censorship. That's authoritarian. These are all direct quotes from his last podcast. And yet suddenly when it's reference to gender, which is even more vague than critical race theory.
He doesn't talk about race that much, but he is one of the loudest cultural war voices on the hatred of transgender people. He doesn't talk about race that much, so he's inconsistent. He's not okay with censorship when it's on like this ambiguous race thing, but he has literally said it shouldn't be allowed for trans celebrities to publicly post pictures of themselves because that might lead to that degeneracy spreading to children, which is a direct ideological through line to the idea that you should just federally ban the subject because that also would pose a threat to children.
This is why it's difficult to have a conversation, because you just said he wants to ban celebrities from allowing them from posting their pictures on Twitter, which has nothing to do with the ban in schools that you were just criticizing him for.
Did he
So
not say it was
conflating all
morally
these
wrong
things.
for trans
Yeah, but
people to exist in a public space?
He definitely didn't say that. He criticized Elliot Page
For posting a selfie. That was what he did. That was literally all he did, by the way. He posted a selfie of himself by the pool. That's it. And he freaked out at it. He made a whole video defending his decision to not delete the tweet like Twitter
as
asked
a
him to.
old boomer. And again,
Oh
there's nuance here. I love how you don't actually think that him being, what is he, 60 or something, actually
but then
makes
he
more
made a
difficult to
video.
communicate in those platforms.
He made an edited video afterwards.
I agree. I made multiple videos saying this is dumb. He's a moron for this.
So you think it's dumb, and I think it's dumb, and here I am pointing out an example of him being weirdly authoritarian when it comes to trans people existing in a public space.
Right. So there's nuance here. Jordan Peterson's perspective, and you can disagree with this, and we can have the debate about the studies, is that there is currently a social contagion, which is the technical term that
that is not wait, hold on. That is not a technical term. Hold on.
Anorexia is technically a social contagion. So is cutting. That's literally the definition of a social contagion.
Is that true?
A social contagion colloquially refers to its etymological root. I mean, yeah, social contagion. But the use of the term social contagion to describe transgenderism is absolutely not technical.
Anorexia nervosa and social contagion, clinical implications. Gender dysphoria, which is a subset of body dysmorphia, where some people could benefit and do benefit, and I know people and I've talked to them, and part of the reason this whole thing is even an issue to begin with is because, and you can doubt this, I don't care, but the reason I bitch about, it'd be very easy for me to just go lump in the right-wing Christian fascist perspective and say all trans people should shut up and all trans people should be banned. I don't believe that. I actually believe the biggest barrier to acceptance of transgender adults is the fact that people look at all the weird shit going on with kids and go, you know what? I don't think about these things as much as Vaush, me, or Andrew, or whoever. But anyone who's against that, I'll vote for. And I don't care if they're also banning adults. I think that's wrong. And that's why I try to be nuanced about this stuff.
I'm going to give Vaush the last word, and then we got to move on to the other super chats. But I actually did not know that social contagion was a clinical term. I had no idea.
I just Googled social contagion trans, and it's just a bunch of articles on how it's not like being trans isn't a social contagion. This is the same shit they said about gay people too. They said that gay
they were wrong about that. Because the medical establishment's capable of being wrong, like they are now about gender.
So wait, you think being gay is a social contagion as well?
No, I think that the medical institutions labeled it as a social contagion and were proven wrong. It's not a social contagion because the rates of homosexuality are stable cross-culturally.
Yeah, and that was only found after an initial surge of evident homosexuality back in the 1980s and 90s.
Like the left hand thing.
Yes, like the left hand thing. So likewise, if we're seeing a surge of trans people now, it might stand to reason that it's not actually a social contagion. It's just a sudden acknowledgement of the existence of a demographic.
It might stand to reason. What are the percentages of Gen Z who identify as trans or genderqueer? Do we know?
If you're including non-binary people, it might be a huge number of them.
Well, everyone's non-binary because gender is a social construct and everyone contains masculinity and femininity within them. So
true. Not really. It's more complicated than that, but sure.
Well, right. Well, that's a good place to leave that, Paul. We got to move on, or we'll never get through it.
Yeah, I do have to go soon. It's been a long day for me.
Yeah, we're almost done. I promise we'll keep it to the 3-hour confines. Vaush, just humor a few more super chats. We're almost done. James Nelson sent in a $10 super chat and says, "Vaush is doing rules for thee, but not for me. Everything cops and anti-Marxists do is evil and must be punished. But you want to impose the same crimes as punishment to get even."
What? Why are they always so vague? It's there's this weird like brand of low IQ perceived hypocrisy where it's like, I've discovered a contradiction. You think bad things are bad, but good things are good. I don't know. What are you talking about? What crimes For revenge? Well, I don't even know what they're referring to.
Okay. Bonsai Pack sends in a $20 super chat and says, guilt by association is a fallacy, a very useful schmear. He actually spells that SCHMER. But okay.
That's probably an anti-Semitic dog whistle. Schmear is a kind of like Jewish application of cream cheese to a bagel. So it's like, the Jews like to. I don't know, man. It's your chat. I just got a feeling. If I'm wrong on that one, that's on me. If I'm right though, aren't they smart?
This is the first time I've ever seen it spelt like that.
What did the super chat say?
It says guilt by association is a fallacy and a very useful schmear to do what thou wilt. Vaush. And thanks BPF for truly revealing debate and powerful performance by all.
Yeah.
So I mean, it doesn't sound like he's beating you up that bad. Just saying that he thinks that there's a smear that's kind of put in there. Maybe he misspelt it. I don't know.
Yeah. The use and spelling of schmear is a direct loan word from Yiddish. Well, we had two identitarians come on earlier, so maybe I'm just looking out for it. Anyway, with regards to the actual point, no. It's not a matter of guilt by association, and guilt by association isn't always fallacious. We're also not evaluating people's individual moral character. We're talking about the actual effects they have in society. If you're associated with a fascist in such a fashion that you say contribute money to them, for example, you could have any ideology, but might still be materially harmful in that fashion, and therefore bad. But I wasn't really making guilt by association arguments. People are complicated. I was just talking about Jordan Peterson and the general ideological tendencies of conservatism.
One of the chatters in my chat, I think he came over from yours, says, probably right. This chat's giving off some ye is right energy. You'll never find somebody who's more critical of Kanye West than I am. Believe me. Aftershock sent in a $5 super chat. I'm getting peppered with these, so I'm just going to condense all of them together because they want me to ask this so bad. Rob Noor versus Vaush. Is a trans woman a woman? When's it happening, Vaush? There's a lot of extra emphasis behind that, by the way.
Maybe. I feel like the convos I've had with Rob weren't that interesting in the past. I don't normally run it through like on pity. I don't know. I'd have to think about it. I'd have to think about it. I need to like reflect. I don't know what there is to talk about. I feel like it's normally just like him reading from a script that he wrote out on toilet paper beforehand, and I'm just sort of sitting there wondering what's a joke and what's not. Yeah.
Okay. This one, I don't have the context for it. For $10 from Christian Baller says, Vaush, stop running from Sitch and Adam. Make sure you give them their props. PF, you would have done a lot worse without them.
Sitch and Adam, I tried to get on their show like 8 times. They talk about me nonstop, which I like me too, so fine. And then I'd see them doing it, and then I'd go like, hey, like I'd DM either of them on Twitter, I think, and then they never responded. Like this has literally happened while I'm streaming like half a dozen times. The one time I got an invitation from them, I think they had Sargon on, they were going over a video of mine, and those absolute pussies, after asking them, hey, can I come on? Like for an hour, I finally end stream because the next day I was doing a 24-hour charity stream. And the actual minute I end stream, Sargon DMs me and he's like, hey, you want to come on? No, I'm going to bed. You had your goddamn chance. Well, I was like, you worried that I was going to make money off of talking to you? Actually, Sargon did whine about that after I trashed him in the last convo we had, that like BreadTube makes money off of debate. Like he's principally opposed to the idea of making money off of YouTube content. And whatever he has to tell himself, I guess.
Okay. I am obligated to say, Adam Friended from Sitch and Adam shared one of my videos when I was below 1,000 subscribers. And that put me over 1,000. So technically, I am his vassal. And if this is a feudal arrangement,
oh shit, it's by proxy then.
Yeah,
potentially.
And
although he wildly disagrees with half of what I said last time I talked to him.
Yeah, I don't have the context, guys. I'm sorry, but Mr. Miner sends in a $5 super chat and says, "Couch, what does the word couch? Is that to Vaush? What does the word degeneracy mean to you, and should it be opposed?" It's who you start with. Couch. I don't know who the couch is.
I have to assume I'm couch. Look, even I've used the term degenerate to refer to like anime viewers. Okay, so it's not like, it's not the term itself, but like when it's being used seriously.
Don't you watch anime though?
I watch good anime. Okay, there are people who watch far worse stuff than me.
Okay.
Okay, it's for people who watch bad, or no, all people who watch anime. Fine, I'm in there too.
I mean, you watch Berserk, right? Obviously, you watch Berserk.
I've read Berserk like 3 times. I haven't watched Berserk. You mean like the '90s show? Yes, of course. Yeah.
It's great, right? It's great.
Oh, it's phenomenal.
Can't go wrong. Yeah, okay.
Beautiful.
All right. I was about to have to throw you off because I was like, "What do you mean you don't watch Berserk?"
Not
But
the
anyway,
modern
right.
3D one. Yeah, the old one was good. Anyway, when people seriously talk about degeneracy, what they mean is like, well, a social contagion. They mean like this is a like pervasive and subversive social force that is wrecking our country from the inside, and it usually refers to something that has to do with like moral character. So like you could argue like socialism is destroying the country from within, but that's not really degeneracy on its own. Socialism would be like drug use because it's perceived to be like representative of a lack of self-control, or being gay or trans because those things are considered to be like interpersonally deviant to a reactionary. Generally, like the idea of degenerates destroying society is really old. I mean, it literally goes back before the Enlightenment, but it's been weaponized more and more with the rise of mass media because it's fundamentally a pseudo-populist accusation. It relies on this collective feel of unease. Is your community being destroyed by this, that, the other? Is yours? And that's a lot easier to pull off when you have like radio and television. It's a real issue. It's a fundamentally irrational way of conducting political messaging.
Raymond Cannon, we're almost done, by the way, guys. Raymond Cannon sends in a $2 super chat and says, "Homeschool or die." Okay, that seems like okay. Wilhelm Bone sends in a $10 super chat, says absolutely nothing. Appreciate that. Vaush says, I can't pronounce the first part, but Warlock, and he sends in a $5 super chat and says, "Vaush, should National Socialist books be banned?"
Like broadly? No, of course not. You probably shouldn't have Mein Kampf in like a 3rd grade classroom. I think that'd be a reasonable thing to not have in there for a variety of reasons. But like on basic First Amendment rules, no. The idea of the state intervening to ban any kind of literature is really, really spooky.
Okay. Wicked Wally sends in a $5 super chat and says, "But if you want to be really fucking based, you define experience with Chrono Trigger references," which I do all the time.
I haven't
Dad
played
joke
Chrono Trigger.
What?
I know. I keep planning to. It's been on my list for ages.
All right. Well, there's an age gap. I get it. Okay. So Vidya sends in a $2 super chat and said, okay, we already went through that with the Rob Noor thing. Juzar sends in a $5.33 super chat. Thank you for that. Says, "Cigarette money for hosting the debate. By the way, quit smoking." See, I think it's a communist conspiracy. They just say it looks cool because they want to kill me. I think that's what I think that it's a communist conspiracy.
Hey,
to get rid of me.
nothing like that. Hey,
right,
come on, go back to sleep.
All right, there's nothing underhanded about it at all. Adult Small Bear sends in a $2 super chat and says, "Your mom's Jordan Peterson." Okay. Kenneth G sends in a $5 super chat and says, "What's with the beard brush? I've had a beard longer than you've been alive, and I've never used a brush. You have some OCD."
It's a stupid tick thing. It's like all the time now. It's so annoying. I didn't used to do that, but now I like yank at my mustache when I'm not thinking, and then I realize I'm like, oh well, now it's in the wrong place. So then I do the brush thing. It's super stupid.
All right.
I gotta like break that habit.
So for $5 comes in, top tier moderation of the Owen Jim Bob debate today. You guys are welcome for that. $15 comes in from James Nelson, and he says, "Give half of this to PF Jung because I don't endorse sophistry," whatever that means, and he isn't getting a dime. $6 from We're Here to Shit Up says, "Vaush, if you believe there's no objective base for ethics, you'd be using universal qualifiers and quantifiers, making it a universal truth claim you need to justify. Also, if most people preferred Hitler, would he be good?"
No, I'm not a moral relativist. I'm just a moral anti-realist. I think my axioms are correct. I also think most people have roughly the same axioms. I'd be willing to bet that outside of a couple of differences, even like Nazis or whatever, like ideologically Nazis, probably have most of the same axioms. An instinctual preference towards human well-being, towards like self-actualization. I think there's always like humans, we have like a biological inclination towards some types of preferences. And I think you can appeal to those pretty strongly. But it's not about relativism. Even if everyone on Earth thought it was like okay to murder and rape people for fun, I don't think that would make it right because my axioms exist outside of their preference.
Last couple of super chats here, guys. We're here to shit up for $6. Says Peterson has a lot of good practical advice, but until people like him and PF ditch classical liberalism, we're not going to get anywhere. Vaush is just the DLC expansion pack final boss of that Enlightenment brain dribble.
Yeah, the aversion to Enlightenment values here, I have to wonder how much of that is like a misguided effort to achieve similar axioms to mine, just like retardedly, you know? Like, multiculturalism has failed, as we can demonstrate by the fact that there are poor black people, there wasn't poverty before the Enlightenment. Like, you rather, multiculturalism has failed, that's why America is so poor and weak compared to other countries. I wonder how much of it is like total delusion, but I think fundamentally the idiot who donated that does want to live like a life of comfort and freedom with people they love, pursuing interests that they value, you know, making a mark on the world in the best way they can. And I feel like there's some brain damage there, but if you can wire around that, I really think there's agreement that you could get at, even with the people I'd consider like the absolute worst.
Bavarian Hog Hunter says it's easy to say you're a good guy while demonizing an entire group of people.
Probably, yeah. I mean, I think the ideology is really bad. Not to like segue here, but referring to what I literally just said, even if I think a person has an abhorrent demonic ideology, I don't think that makes them essentially bad, right? Everyone can change. I admit that my fiery language might not be the best for convincing like everyone, and that's fine. But I think some people actually kind of like the super direct, like upfront, you know, prove to me why you're not this kind of method. I mean, somebody must, or my channel wouldn't have done, you know, very well, I imagine. But yeah, it's not meant to be an essentialist criticism.
Gotcha. Okay, these are the last two, and we're going to get you guys out right at the 3-hour mark, which I'm happy about. $5 comes in from Adam Dole, says, using Umberto Eco's to create a definition of fascism is the same as using Ayn Rand's definition of socialism, opposed to going to Giovanni Gentile or Karl Marx, respectively. Good stream, Andrew. Nice to see you here, Vaush.
Karl Marx lived and died before the rise of modern fascism, so I really don't know how like good his descriptions would have been in retrospect. No, I think that the Umberto Eco's 14 points are really, really good because fascism is necessarily idiosyncratic. It borrows a lot of stuff. It's irrational, it pulls in, it's messy. Take a look at the rise of 10 dictators from 10 countries. You'll find up very similar ideologies with very different messaging. I think it's more important to look at like the cultural tendencies, the underlying logic, than it is to go like, okay, well, what is the government structure? What specific ideals? It's like defining liberalism or capitalism. What does it mean for a country to be capitalist, right? Basically, every country on earth is capitalist. I mean, there aren't any like stateless communist utopias, but there are so many varieties of how it presents that you have to refer to like tendencies more so than explicit descriptors. Systems are complicated.
Lemon sends in $4. Last one says, Andrew, blessed feast of the prophet Zechariah. To Vaush, please reject modernity and embrace orthodoxy.
There's this really weird trend right now of people pretending that they're Orthodox Christians or like Catholics. No, you're not. Shut up. I've seen a million people like you. All of you just liked the friend Peppo memes where he's wearing a Crusader helmet, or like you saw a picture of a big Orthodox church and you were like, yeah, dude, that's red pill, just like me. Shut up. You don't practice. You don't follow the faith. You haven't read the texts. Okay, shut up. Okay, stop looking for a supernatural justification of your shitty ideology. Just have the balls to step up and believe the dumb things that you believe without pretending that you're being motivated by some kind of underlying religious enlightenment. God almighty. Jesus Christ. Some of these people, man.
I
agree.
There was just one that I missed, and it's good because we still have 2 minutes on the clock. AI Enhanced Cinema says, Vaush, do you support the Weimar Germany degeneracy that extended to sex with animals and children under 15? If you think those things didn't exist, would there ever be a society possible in which those could ever be acceptable?
Well, first of all, I'm pretty sure that sex with animals in a lower age of consent is just a Western European special. I mean, from what I'm aware of, Spain, England, France, Germany, like a bunch of these countries have, in my opinion, worse attitudes on these issues than America. So I don't know if this is necessarily a Weimar thing. Also, if you think there wasn't a bunch of rape of children in Nazi Germany, Yeah, there are some historical texts on that one I would reflect on. Not to mention all the rampant drug use. What happened to anti-degeneracy? Look, if you want a society free of those things, then there are actually a bunch of resources you can find on preventing sex trafficking that also talk about stuff like the abuse of children. You want sex education, which makes it easier for young people who are being abused to identify what's being done to them, because the ignorance of young people is often exploited by abusers. You want to support feminism and like Me Too movements. You want you want to create social systems that support and uplift people who are being abused, because that makes it a lot easier to catch abusers. But all of these things are part of the liberal degeneracy you denounce. Your society, not mine, is the one that would be having these problems. And probably the Nazis animals too. I don't know. Maybe, I don't know. I haven't looked into that. Let's just say they did to make it easier to
Just assume it.
let's just assume, assuming as first principles that they animals. Moving forward.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. This was actually quite good. I enjoyed it very much. Let's start with PF Young. Go ahead, shout your channel out to everybody where they can find you.
Yeah, I'm Paul. I have a channel called PF Young. I'll just say, to wrap this up, what I said at the beginning. I did enjoy this. I appreciate this. Like I said, I went to therapy and I spent many months sitting with and talking about the worst parts of myself. And so the reason that even though I truly believe
Paul, you want to shout out your channel?
Let me finish my point. It's more important than that.
This is the channel shout out time, Paul.
Can I finish my point?
Make it quick.
Okay, I'll make it quick. The reason I say that is because I want to engage with people like Vaush. I want to engage with people like you, Andrew, who I think holds just as morally reprehensible beliefs in the opposite direction. And we all think the other two has terrible beliefs. The reason I bring that up is because I do think that when you say, for example, my conservative family members are equivalent to the KKK, that bothers me. But I don't think that the best way to address that is to say, go yourself and you're a terrible person for all these reasons. So with that, what I would say is I would have a beer with either of you. Okay?
Okay. I appreciate that. Vaush, would you like to shout your channel out real quick?
That and something else. I'm Vaush. You can find me at Vaush, Vaushing. But also, I enjoyed the convo very much, Paul. We obviously disagree on a lot, and I'll just leave it at that. We disagree on a lot, but you are a human being. A lot of these conversations I have, I'm talking with these giggling, frenetic messes who know they're lying. They know they're lying when they talk to me. They don't care. Yeah,
I've seen it. Yeah,
you obviously care. You care enough to emote. You care enough to engage. I really appreciate that. Sincerely, I do. It means a lot. So much. Harder and harder to find debates where it seems like both people actually give a shit about the positions they're coming to the table with. So yeah, I hope you have a wonderful day. I hope both of you have a wonderful day, and I appreciate the time.
Yeah, have a great night from all of us here at the Crucible to all of you out there in Crucible Land. Have a wonderful night.
All right, I think I did well there in terms of my position. I actually did like talking to Paul. A good amount. That guy was so dumb. Well, he said it up front, and I think it's true. I think he has a very strong emotional attachment to a couple of the positions here. I mean, we all do, right? But no, I enjoyed the conversation a lot. That was fun. I do quite like the super chats and the call-ins at the end, though, because yelling at the Nazis who follow Big Papa fascists is very funny. It's just dude, they're all it's like tropes every time. It's like I'm not a Nazi, I'm an identitarian. Yeah, embrace orthodoxy. It's like, okay, man. Come on. Thanks for that closing, Vaush. I agree. He was very human in his approach to stuff. Yeah, so okay, I've said this before, but like the final stage of fascist engagement in terms of like disagreeing with other people is knowing dishonesty. By the time you get people who are like fully over, they are actively anti-empiricist. Like they no longer in any way value, like politically, ethically, anything, the idea of truth. That's like the end state for fascism. A lot of fascists don't even reach that, It's not all of them all the time, but that is like the end point. And a lot of people who are fascist, who debate online, are in that position. They are unreachable. Like the only reason you would ever talk to them is like springboarding a tennis ball off of a wall. They're just there for you to catch and throw. It's not, there's not two people there. But with Paul, My man's actually a guy, like a person, you know, and quite emotive too, which I actually find very charming. He kind of looked like Ludwig, don't you think? A little bit, yeah. Also, we got a surprise Rob Noah jump scare. Yeah, it was pretty fun. I don't agree. I thought he was completely disconnected the whole time. I think he had a strong emotional attachment to some of these points that made him less willing to consider some of the stuff that I was saying. But that's, to me, that's very, very different from like knowingly running away from a point, or like knowingly lying, or knowingly whataboutisming, you know? And I appreciate that. I'm glad he cares. He cared enough to be offended by the whole like fascism KKK family member thing, which my goal wasn't to offend him. I mean, I stand by my comparison. But the fact that he could be offended meant he cared about what he was saying, which is, again, like an indication of sincerity, which I appreciate. It wasn't like performative denunciation. He was actually offended by what I said, and he actually tried to get me to walk it back. I didn't, but I appreciate the fact that he tried to get me to.